gonna start with, why are you so stingy? You literally live in a castle. You have gold doubloons like an effing pirate, priceless spices stolen from foreign lands, and gemstones harvested fresh from the earth. But you're gonna have us measure every loaf of bread so they're the exact same? Back in the late 1500s, Viscount Montagu demanded meticulous records of every expenditure. The clerk of the kitchen was a crossbreed between an extreme couponer and a professional nitpicker, who had to provide the cooks with the ingredients for every meal in exact amounts for each person to be served, and ensure that each plate had the exact same weight and proportions laid upon it. Among his many duties was also to ensure every wheat loaf that went in the oven weighed 18 ounces and was 16 ounces when it was taken out. What happens if they weighed more or less? Off to the bread breaking wheel, or maybe the sourdough slow slicer, off to the steak for a little French toasting, Anyway, for how the British monarchy would pitch a fit over a 3-letter word: children, not kids. Because we all want to speak a little bit more like Mary Poppins. Oh yes, little children, off to bed we go. Nah, dude, I couldn't do the whole royal nanny thing, to be honest. The education required enough makes you think that they're scouting for NASA, not someone to stop their kid from picking its nose. Publicly, at least. Maria Borello, the nanny who takes care of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, trained at the notable Norland College in Bath, England, before being hired to the world's most famous children. At this college, students like Borello study early years development for 3 years. However, as well as learning social and emotional development, students are also taught the importance of vocabulary. There is one word that royal nannies are prohibited from using to describe royal children: kids. Ask me why. Come on. Ask me. It's because of the exact honky-dory dumbass reason you think. It's the baby goat thing. Kids is a name for them and an informal name for children, because who says that it's not the Victorian era? According to Heron, the word kid is disrespectful and dissuades royal children from being seen as individuals. You mean like how sheltering them and not allowing them everyday friends or normal reality or exposure to the real world under the guise of safety, but it's more so they grow up in a bubble of unrealistic world perspective and can't understand problems morally and empathetically as an adult, only in a political sense. You mean like that? Sounds like what they're doing. And speaking of the Windsors, did y'all know Charles specifically sucks? A lot of kings imposed a lot of rules for their servants, but something about King Charles gets the most under the skin. Maybe it's because he had some pretty frivolous, unrealistic asks for a man who just got the throne this year. So listen to his tea procedure alone. Charles is very particular for how his tea is served when he's visiting the Paladinian house. When preparing the tea, you must use a teaspoon measurement of tea leaves per cup, and then there must be an exact temperature of 7 degrees Celsius for green tea and 100 degrees Celsius for Earl Grey or English breakfast. The prince's hot beverage must also be checked with a thermometer before being served, and honey should always be used to sweeten the tea rather than sugar. When serving the tea to the prince, the teaspoon should be situated precisely to the right underneath of the handle of the cup. Clive Goodman, a royal reporter for News of the World, claimed that Prince Charles does nothing himself. He described the morning scene in which Charles gets ready for the day, but all the preparation is done for him. He gets up in the morning, his bathrobe is there waiting for him. He walks into the bathroom, the bath is drawn for him already. Even when he gets out of the bath, the towel is already folded in a special way, so he just has to sit in it and wrap it around himself. Then he goes into the dressing room, his clothes are laid out for him, even his socks, left and right, are in the exact right spot. Charles even has valets squeeze 1 inch of toothpaste onto his toothbrush every morning. If anyone gets anything wrong, everyone is scolded. Gosh, and I'm sure y'all remember the viral video of him from September of 2022 forcing a servant to come clear off the desk of like 3 pieces of paper because he couldn't have done it himself.
Number 7. Morad IV. Something about kings being great also goes hand in hand with them being terrible at the same time. 17th Sultan of the Ottoman throne, Morad IV came to power in September 1623 at the age of 11. But since he was so young, the Ottomans were ruled by his mother, Kosum Sultan, and other relatives, who did a pretty horrendous job. As a tween, he walked around the cities dressed as a commoner and would keep a list of those he could benefit from and those he could punish. At 11. At 21, he took control and also took some extreme precautions in order to eliminate the corruption within the empire, banning the use of alcohol and tobacco and coming up with severe measurements for the regular collection of taxes. Morad IV would never be okay with people disobeying his laws and directives, even going around the city in plain clothes to check any undisciplined actions by the locals, and he would personally punish the offenders. He did a lot for the Ottomans, but boy was he harsh about it. He destroyed coffee houses, like, come on man. Number 6. Phalaris. Phalaris of Akragas was a tyrannical Sicilian ruler from around 571 to 554 BC. And this dude was so bad, his own people overthrew him after his 16 years of rule. Phalaris became ruler by some unconventional ways when it came to other kings on this list. Some think he started as a farmer who held office, and other more fun stories say he was appointed to build a temple, and instead of doing that, he took the money and built a fortress, allowing him to take power. He expanded the territory of Akragas from the south coast of Sicily all the way up to the north coast, but he was known much better for how gosh darn cruel he was. The most famous story would have to be the one of the Brazen Bull. An engineer was hired by Phalaris to create a new device for doing heinous things to his prisoners. The engineer presented him with a bronze bull. There was a door that could be opened to place a prisoner inside, then they would light a fire underneath, heating up the bull and causing the poor soul inside to thrash about and yell, making the bull seem alive. He then used it on the engineer. Thanks to the citizens' revolt though, he got to be the last victim of the bull. Looks like karma's a bull. Number 5. Louis XIV. King of France, the Sun King, the God-given. Ruling from 1638 to 1715, Louis XIV was well known for his love of art, which was apparent in the royal palace of Versailles he created, his love of women for his multiple wives and many more mistresses, and the comparison of himself to God, even taking up the sun as his symbol, being representative of Apollo, the sun god, and the literal reason we're all alive. A good symbol, honestly. The Palace of Versailles was used to host comedies, operas, and tragedies, and spectacular parties. His suite in the palace was made up of 3 apartments all for himself. The palace was big enough to hold his entire court so that none of them could really plot against him without him knowing. It also contained the Hall of Mirrors, which was a 71-meter long room with 357 mirrors around 17 arches opposite the massive windows. Unlike most other kings on this list, Louis XIV was a fantastic ruler. He was an incredibly lavish one though, which equals spoiled in my mind. Number 4. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan Tsar was a great military leader, pretty much setting up the Russian Empire. A great leader with an absolutely terrible temper. His rage-filled outbursts just got worse and worse over the years of his rule from 1530 to 1584. One of these incidents even ending in the stab-filled demise of his own son. He had a special force called the Oprachina who eliminated anybody he felt threatened him, and he led this force to Novgorod in 1572, resulting in the massacre of Novgorod, which gets him a firm place as one of the cruelest of Russian rulers. There is the even more popular story of him making that peculiar-looking castle in Moscow, and then dispatching the man who designed it so no one else could have one. He is one of the most cruel, paranoid, bad-tempered, and greedy rulers in not just Russian history, but history in general. Literally terrible. Number 3. Nero. Another Roman emperor who was effectively insane. Seems to be like a trend. Best known for his spicy parties, political delifings, persecution of Christians, and love for music that led to the rumor that Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned during the Great Fire of 64 AD. Nero first became emperor at 17, and the first little bit of his rule saw him be responsible for the demise of multiple people, including his mother and his newest wife, Poppaea, in a casual outburst of rage. He was quite the artist, singing and performing and encouraging others to take lessons, and he held sport events all the time, even taking part himself. Remember that fire I talked about? Well, some people believe he may have started it himself in order to make a bigger palace. But if he did or didn't, he blamed the Christians and punished them much more than necessary, like dressing them in animal skins and having them torn apart by dogs, or being burned to the afterlife in pyres that would light his own garden parties. Oh, and he bankrupted the Roman treasury building the aforementioned palace where he held his ridiculous parties we talked about before with a 100-foot golden statue of himself. Nice. Number 2. Bad King John. Kings be bad sometimes. But when it came to lechery, treachery, and shocking acts of cruelty, the king who sealed the Magna Carta takes the cake. According to the historians at least. While known for the Magna Carta, he is also well known as the king involved in the stories of Robin Hood. But these being fairy tales, was he really that bad? No! He was much, much, much worse. During the time that he ruled, most nobles who were captured in war were kept in not so bad confinement. John said no though. like when he captured his own nephew who miraculously disappeared, and about 22 knights who were sent to a castle to starve to the afterlife, to stop their families from continuing to fight. He did the same thing to the wife and son of his former friend. If that weren't bad enough, when his brother, who was king at the time, was taken prisoner, he tried to seize the throne, and he is famous for forcing himself on the wives and daughters of his own barons. As you may remember from Robin Hood, there was a monetary aspect to his horribleness as well. The taxes and fines he levied were to the point of extortion. I talked to Andrew, who talked to the chief, and he said, King John ain't it. Number 1. Henry VIII. Here we are, the main man himself. We've talked about him before, and how could we not? He's arguably one of the most infamous English kings. Historians have described him as obsessive, syphilitic, and a self-indulgent wife delifer and tyrant. These historians probably leave the best Google reviews. It's not just his whole multiple wives to find a male heir situation that makes him spoiled. Well, kind of it is. To achieve his personal ends, he literally spurred on a religious revolution that created the Church of England, the formal end of monasteries, and the Reformation. Which is hilarious because he wrote a treatise against Martin Luther that had him named Defender of the Faith by the Pope. Ironic. He, like many of the others, was a lover of art, music, and sport, at least in his younger years. But he was also an incredibly costly ruler. While he unified much of England with Wales and Ireland, in 1520, with King Francis I of France, Henry co-hosted the Field of the Cloth of Gold, which was incredibly lavish and showed off his immaturity. Speaking of immaturity, there are tons of cases where people were separated from their heads simply for not giving him what he wanted, including some of his friends and his wives. A great number 1 for this list, in my opinion.
Number 10, the young Tsar. Being the leader of a nation is hard. I play a lot of city builders, trust me, I know. Being the leader of a nation whose people have been brutally oppressed by your family's dynasty for 300 years and in general living in very poor conditions, especially compared to the rest of the world, that's hard too. Even harder. Nicholas II inherited the throne from his father, which sounds great, but in reality was a lot of pressure to do so. As it turns out, Russia was in need of drastic change, and they would get it from the people and a bald man with very pointy facial hair. A communist revolution saw the Empire of Russia fall. 300 years of Romanov rule end overnight, as the Tsar was forced to abdicate his throne. So what's his crime? Well, not doing anything. Negligence. He did so much nothing that people had to do something. Number 9. Nero's steam. We've talked about Emperor Nero quite a lot on this channel, but that's because he's the down bad Roman emperor who puts opulence in Pax Romana. It's hard to pinpoint an exact crime or moment from him, as he's the guy you think about when you think of Roman emperors. However, his crimes against his wife Claudia Octavia are very notable. So when Nero was getting remarried, he had to get rid of Octavia. I mean, you can't have like 40 wives, you gotta get rid of her. But how? I mean, how do you get rid of a woman like that? He actually did the whole James Bond villain thing where the victim gets placed into a trap. It's very crude, but theatrical, because remember, theatrics are important, remember that folks. Hence, Octavia was banished to an island where shortly after she was locked into a vapor bath, where she suffocated. Naturally, to make himself look better, they made it look like she did it, not him. So yeah, what a great guy. What an absolute hero in that story. Definitely not a villain. Number 8, Afzal Khan. Everyone remembers King Henry VIII for doing what he did to his wives. A naughty, slap on the wrist, naughty, don't do that, for shame. However, I would like to offer Afzal Khan as the alternative monster here. He didn't unalive a handful of wives like Henry, no. He actually managed to rack up a count of 63. Yep, you heard me right, 63. First off, I don't know how you have that many wives and or remember names, let alone birthdays and anniversaries. I would not do very well in that situation. Well, what's the reason for all this blood spilling? It's pretty horrible, actually. Simply because he was being invaded, and the guy who was invading him and winning was slightly nicer to women and was going to most likely give them a better life. Jeez, talk about if I can't have it, no one can. God.
Since that highly debated viral clip was mentioned, I'll make the next point about how gratitude is implied, which it's most definitely not. I don't see a lot of gratitude coming from royal families. There is endless videos and pictures of these sour-faced monarchs harassing and devaluing the endless service they have accompanying them. Let me hit y'all with an iconic example. Have you seen Downton Abbey? Most folks have. Have you ever noticed one of their royal or aristocratic characters ever say thank you to their servants? No? And that's an intentional detail, as it's been a long since unspoken, at least in British monarchy, that servants are best unthanked and unheard. Now, Alistair Bruce in the BTS documentary about the TV show series explained his perspective, that the servants did everything for their masters, and if thanks were given, it would be necessary to say them at least 60 times a day. That would be, as the English say, tiresome. It does stand that servants are not required to be thanked no matter if they just tied your shoe or wipe your ass. You as a royal have the right to just scoff and point and expect results. But at least one royal who can't verbally berate you is the revered royal pets. Multiple royal houses and their respective rulers have decided to use these rules and servants to treat their pets as an extension of themselves. By personifying them, even just trimming a corgi's nails too short could get you proverbially beheaded and definitively fired. Some famous examples of royals who have servants service their pets are Queen Elizabeth II staged a funeral for a chameleon, and an Indian ruler Muhammad Khan threw a lavish elaborate wedding for his dog. Louis of France took being a cat person to a whole other level and basically turned Versailles into a giant breeding ground. Charles II of England issued a royal law that his iconic King Charles Spaniels, which are obviously named after him, have license to walk anywhere in the kingdom without harassment, even Parliament. And of course, who can forget Caligula, who appointed his favorite horse, Icarus, as an official senator. But I'd have to say, I imagine there's not much worse than food tasting. Normally, you'd be able to think this wouldn't be so bad. Wrong, let me make it worse. So obviously, they're tasting it for poison and other tricky little substances that could take down a king. What if the soup was laced with arsenic? How easy is it to slip into the kitchen and lace the king's food with belladonna or hemlock? The food tester was always a servant, or sometimes even a slave, or a prisoner. And if you think about those status of those people, well, they were eating mush flour and bone broth and then calling it a day. Given the opportunity to be a food taster means the literal taste of luxury. The only effed part is the first bite of flavorful rice you're ever going to eat in your life, you're going to immediately die. Maybe. It'd be enough for you to put off eating any meal you didn't prepare yourself, and there'd be no way of knowing if the food was deadly until after you've eaten it. In 1594, there was a plot to poison Queen Elizabeth, apparently the King of Spain, as the Spanish were enemies of England at the time. A group of Portuguese men had agreed to carry out the dirty work, including the Queen's own physician Rodrigo Lopez. Once the plot was uncovered, all men were executed. And it's not just our ancient royals that brought people on to do this task. Naturally, President Putin has a food taster as part of his security team. No hoovering, which is British for don't vacuum. In 2011, Royal Servants was uploaded to YouTube, a documentary that gave insight into what it's like working for the royal family, including accounts from former butlers, chefs, nannies, and footmen. To quote the narrator, the best servant is one that is neither seen nor heard. The royal family demand the most professional servants in the world, the kind of servants that would rather die than make a mistake. She continues on in this not pretentious at all breakdown, saying that behind the scenes, butlers lay out clothes, footmen carry early morning trays, and cleaners sweep carpets, lest royal ears are offended by vacuum cleaners. One rule cleaners must follow is that they have to sweep the floors instead of hoovering them, because the sound may be too loud, especially in the early morning. I don't know if you guys have seen these palaces, but they're about 110% red carpet, and it's not that cheap kind. This stuff probably holds onto dirt the way your homie holds onto their cheating ex. Not being permitted to use such modern inventions makes their job not even a little, but a lot more difficult. Immensely. They have to quite literally sweep the carpets, the most ineffective way to clean a carpet that's tacked into the ground. And they're already being held at a higher standard than really any other servant on earth. But don't forget, after you're done measuring the carrots, you feed the horses, and sweeping a carpet, you also have to kiss the linens. Whichever unfortunate servant was tasked with making Henry VIII's bed after he woke up in the morning was then required to kiss every part of the linen to prove he hadn't smeared poison on them. What? Don't get me wrong, Henry was like intensely and increasingly paranoid. You can go check my recent video, Top 10 King Henry VIII Facts You Never Knew, to learn more about his whole mess. But anyway, Anyways, someone screws the pooch. Pretty sure it's Ambroise Parge, the 16th century French royal physician who once wrote, "Now poisons do not only kill being taken into the body, but some being put or applied outwardly." And now this delusional hypochondriac finds out the poison can sink in through his skin, not just be ingested, and he insists on this gross ritual. In an era where sheets don't get washed, and he doesn't wash, and he's all sweaty and gouty, and banging tons of biddies in that bed. Imagine having to kiss those sheets every morning. That's the real poison. RIP, dude. Mint essence oil under the nose, and I'm just praying for you. When the standard of hygiene is so low, your only request is that X marks the spot. Eleanor Harmon, the author of The Royal Art of Poison, says royal palaces, some courtiers don't even bother to look for a chamber pot, but just dropped their britches and did their business. All of their business. All of it. All of it in the staircases, the hallways, or the fireplaces. In Versailles, women just pulled up their skirts to pee where they stood, and some men urinated off the balustrade in the middle of the royal chapel. The smelly truth is that Hampton Court, that of Henry VIII, was not well equipped to serve the bodily needs of hundreds upon hundreds of servants. During the king's boisterous banquets, busy servants regularly needed the call of nature, so they relieved themselves in hidden hallway corridors or on sizzling fireplaces that were cooking the food. I need a minute with that one. Anyways, the walls reeked of urine so badly that according to historian Lucy Worsley in her book If Walls Could Talk, the palace management would have had crosses chalked into the walls with the hope that people would be reluctant to desecrate a religious symbol. That's right. While servants were always encouraged to pee in vats, so their urine could be used to clean later, to keep servants and courtiers from urinating on the garden walls, Henry had large crosses painted in problem spots, I guess. But instead of deterring men from relieving themselves, what it did was literally give them a target. To fix the problem, Henry VIII then realized he had to make bathrooms, so he constructed a giant toilet block by the River Thames called the Great House of Easement. And of course, last but not least, fresh out the kitchen of Henry VIII is Dee's roasted chestnuts. King Henry VIII's kitchen at Hampton Court Palace was one of the largest kitchens in Europe, and obviously it would have had to be to service the banquets of grandeur I was just talking about. There were huge wood fireplaces producing an average of 800 to 1,000 meals in a day, courtesy of just a mere 200 cooks. Naturally, that amount of ovens and that amount of cooks in the kitchen, yeah, it's downright cozy. And the average of 1.3 million logs were burned, creating a hellish atmosphere, leaving the cooks drained and drenched in sweat. From roasting meats to boiling cauldrons, the kitchen of Henry VIII was no less than passing as the underworld. So, what happened in all this heat, dare say? Did they crack a window? Did they get some ice? Take a smoke break, maybe? Nah, the cooks just took off all their clothes to tolerate the temperature while it's cooking. Just to reiterate, all their clothes. All of them. But alas, the atrocities were never ending for these men, as King Henry VIII issued an order to stop being naked or in garments of such vileness as they do now, nor lie in the nights and days in the kitchen or the ground by the fireside. To combat the problem, clerks of the kitchen were instructed to purchase honest and wholesome garments for the staff. And guess what that was? There's a reason the apron covers the front.
In at number 10 is Ludwig II. Ludwig operated as the King of Bavaria from 1845 to 1886. He was an opera fan, builder of dream palaces, spendthrift, deposed monarch, and likely the victim of a coup. So, Ludwig was an enthusiastic consumer of art, so when he was appointed to the throne at just 18, he exploits his status for entertainment. He funds his hero, the composer Richard Wagner, on some of the era's most renowned operas. He also built Neuschwanstein? I can't say it properly to save my life, but it's a fairy tale palace on a hilltop. All this lavish expenditure was causing more and more debt in the empire, and so higher taxes. It caused in 1886 conspirators to file a false medical document declaring Ludwig insane and unfit to rule. He may have spent an insane amount of money, but he himself wasn't. So, irregardless, that next morning, Ludwig and his personal physician are found floating dead in a Bavarian lake with no indication as to what had happened to him. One of Ludwig's most famous statements had been, "I wish to remain an eternal enigma to myself and others." Well, goal achieved. Number 9 is Henry V. Can't talk crazy without bringing up this guy. He's famous for his rinse and repeat style of having wives. As you may know, first he gets a wife, then he gets tired of her and is annoyed she can't have his male heir, so he obtains a side piece. So now you get rid of the initial wife, usually through and then marry the side piece. Repeat. He did this numerous times. Henry also slept with just about anyone he could find, including his second wife's sister, and he may have fathered 2 of her kids. Ugh. And Henry is recorded to have a minimum of 12 mistresses outside his 6 wives, but there is potential for more. When Henry takes up wife number 1's lady-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, he had actually subverted the entire religion that they were a part of in order to divorce his initial wife Catherine and marry this mistress, effectively establishing a new church in which he became the head and changing the course of history. The huge scandal came not so much from that, but because in 1536 Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, 1 her own brother, and plotting the king's assassination, which was a sensational news story at the time. Number 8 is the Christian IV of Denmark. Even when he first took the throne in 1766, people were already convinced he was crazy. This brat threw food at dinner guests and picked fights, but rich people can be real jerks, so it wasn't until at some point when Christian discovered a newfound interest in his that he became an official write-off. This guy became so obsessed with the flicking of the wrist that it interrupted his royal duties. In fact, his court confronted him with the concern that it was affecting his health and could potentially make him infertile or insane, in an 18th century version of "stop that or you'll go blind." Thankfully, he didn't do it in front of visiting dignitaries at first. Instead, he just did other weird stuff, like leapfrog to them or slap them without warning or push them over. He'd randomly yelp or holler in the middle of a conversation. Eventually, the court's concern grew true, and Christian was so nuts that his personal physician managed to talk him into handing over the control of executive decision making to himself, also while banging Christian's wife in the background. Christian wanted to keep that appendage to himself, so I guess somebody else had to do the job for him. Or both of them, I guess.
And before he went around dismantling religions to get some nookie, Henry was a devout choir boy. You might know Henry as the king who split from Rome and brought around the Anglican faith, but in his youth, Henry was a vehement supporter of Catholicism and its head. He sent tin from Cornwall to adorn the roof of Pope Julius II's new palace. He supported the papacy, and in 1521 even published a book-length slam poem against the German Protestant reformer Martin Luther. He referred to Luther as a venomous serpent, a pernicious plague, an infernal wolf, an infectious soul, a detestable trumpeter of pride, calumnies, and schism. In recognition of Henry's forceful piety, Pope Leo X, I can't remember that number, awarded him the title of Fidei de Defensor, aka Defender of the Faith. Henry was actually going to join the church himself before his older brother Arthur died and left him a throne and a wife to take care of. Scarcely a decade after being called Defender of Faith, Henry led a schism of his own, cleaving the Church of England into the wider Catholic Church after the Pope Clement refused to annul Henry's 16-year marriage to Catherine. Oh, it's time, y'all, because you may have known he was a womanizer, but did you know Henry was also a consistent king? What do I mean? Have you guys ever paid attention to the names of his wives? So, they were Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. So it went Catherine, Anne, Jane, Anne, Catherine, Catherine. I feel like if Henry had lived longer, there would have been another Anne and a Jane that would have come along, and then another Catherine, Catherine. Ironically, Jane Seymour, the middle wife and the only unique name in the bunch, was Henry's favorite, but more on that sappy tale in a bit. There's a common belief that Henry married and discarded his 6 wives in quick succession, but that's not exactly true. When Henry's older brother died, he inherited a kingdom and a wife, Catherine, and they remained married for nearly 24 years. During that time, Catherine was faithful to Henry, but Henry was sticking it in any lady he could find, except Anne Boleyn, who made him wait. So his answer, annul a whole marriage just to get some. But as mentioned, Pope wouldn't do that, so Henry had to start a whole new religion just so he could. Guess he shouldn't have done that, because Henry gets so desperate to end the relationship with Anne, he makes up allegations, maybe history's rocky on that, of adultery and treason, and had the marriage annulled and her beheaded. Jane had served as a lady-in-waiting to both Catherine and Anne, and I kid you not, Anne and Jane had gotten in actual fistfights because of Anne's jealousy, so just picture a 15th century catfight. On October 12, 1537, Jane gave birth to Edward, their only male heir, and then died from complications due to the birth several weeks later. This is the only woman Henry had actually truly loved, and the loss decimated him for 2 years. His next wife, another Anne, catfished him with her portrait. Turns out she's ugly, and they amicably divorce after 6 months, so she lives out her life in comfy luxury in the country. Smart woman. The next Catherine was all young and hot at the time when Henry was repugnant and unable to walk, and it was more of a classic sugar baby situation. She cheated a bunch and got beheaded. The final Catherine was a grown-up mature adult woman, shockingly a widow or two, and of all of Henry's wives, Catherine had the most influence on the court culture, religion, and role of women, and she also persuaded Henry to restore his daughters Mary and Elizabeth to the order of succession. When you marry that many women, however, it's actually easy to see where his heart laid. Years before his death, Henry made plans to build a monumental tomb for himself, but also Jane Seymour. She truly was his favorite queen, the one woman he definitely loved, and the mother of his only surviving male heir. Henry went as far as to confiscate a black marble sarcophagus that was originally intended for the powerful churchman Cardinal Wolsey to be used at the center of their tomb. The monumental tomb was in the works for most of his time on the throne, but during the tumultuous years after his death in 1547, it was never completed. So Henry and Jane were left to rest in peace in what was going to be temporary lodgings in Windsor Castle until said monument was all wrapped up. But it never did, and the kingdom was so bankrupt that it didn't really ever come around. So completing it seemed a little impractical. It had been a long time, and Henry's intended tomb is now actually home to another famous figure. 2.5 centuries later, the sarcophagus became part of an ornate national monument, the final resting place of Horatio Nelson, the great British naval hero of the Napoleonic Wars. Anyways, on to his children, because these poor guys were nearly victims of their dad's dirty plan. For the longest time, Henry didn't have a legitimate male heir, so he decided to concoct what, had it come to fruition, might have been the grossest marriage ever, although I feel like the Habsburgs would hear that sentence and as a challenge say, hold my beer. Anyways, Jane may have popped out Henry's only official heir, but he did have an illegitimate son by his mistress. Henry Fitzroy, a surname that literally means son of the king, so a hilarious thing to name your bastard child, was named Duke of Richmond. In order to ensure that his country didn't descend into literal war again over lack of male heir, King Henry wanted Fitzroy to be the next monarch. How, may you ask? Why, marry the boy to his half-sister Mary. This plan got so close to fruition that the couple already had the green light from the Pope. Thankfully, Fitzroy was in love and married someone else. When Fitzroy died at age 17, it left the door open for Henry's legitimate kids to take the throne. Thankfully, as mentioned, Jane ensured both daughters as well as the son got their chance. And speaking of Fitzroy's half-sister, Bloody Mary, she wasn't the only family member that wasn't all there. Henry the Hectic is next. It's widely known that quite a few of these famous noble and aristocratic lines were also plagued by mental illness. Various theories have pointed at Henry's syphilis and brain injuries as possible causes. After all, it would be logical to assume that the damage occurred to the frontal lobes from having a horse buck him off twice. That region of the brain processes impulse control, external cues from other actions, and social and lustuous behavior. He also began to comfort eat around this period. Everyone's heard of that person who's had a stroke and just wasn't the same afterwards. So brain damage likely could be the explanation. In 2020, researchers actually discovered what they believe is the site where Henry received the blow to his head that could have caused traumatic brain injury. But it might come down to hereditary psychiatric problems in the family. His paternal great-grandmother Catherine of Valois was the daughter of the famously mentally ill King Charles III. Her family's psychiatric issues seem to have been passed down through generations to multiple British monarchs. In his later years, Henry had a significant personality shift towards paranoia, fits of rage, depression, and anxiety, and he sent crowds of prisoners to the Tower of London. He sent more men and women to their deaths than any other English monarch, an estimated 57 to 72,000 people. Yikes, dictator numbers. But one thing about Henry, no matter how unhealthy homeboy got, he earned that chub. Huge misconception, Henry was only morbidly obese in the last few years of his life. For a long time before that, however, he was one of the most handsome and hella fit men of his era. Dude was well over 6 foot and had a 34-inch waist. In 1536, Henry was taking part in a tournament when he fell off his horse and the horse fell on him, leaving the king unconscious for several hours and forever altering his cheerful, outgoing personality. This is the second horse-related mass head injury Henry sustained. After this injury and the further ulcer development in his legs, Henry was left pretty much unable to exercise. His made-to-measure suits of armor chart the king's expansion, with his final set around 1540, suggesting he weighed more than 300 pounds with a waist of 54 inches. As a matter of fact, Henry was so overweight he needed a mechanical device to help him get in and out of bed. When he died in 1547, he weighed nearly 400 pounds with a 60-inch waist. Impressive in a time before 10 cheeseburgers for $10, but I mean, if you're over 50, ruled a kingdom, injured his health for around 30 years, you can just let go, who cares? And last but never the least, Henry was a hypochondriac king. Henry was obsessed with sickness and disease, specifically the sweating sickness and the plague. This is pretty fair. By the age 30, he'd already caught smallpox and malaria a couple times. Anytime there was an outbreak of anything, he would minimize his risk of infection by straight up leaving London and limiting the number of ambassadors he saw. Even when Anne Boleyn caught the sweating sickness in 1528, Henry said peace and stayed far away until she got better. Henry, bad husband. Good infection minimizer though. Naturally, like any germaphobe, Henry was doing the most to feel clean. So he was known to self-medicate. He even wrote his own prescription book, which detailed how to treat ulcers and reduce inflammation. He diagnosed himself with so many illnesses and disorders that it was actually hard to keep track of all of them. From migraines to insomnia and gout, Henry's life was spent dealing with and or avoiding various different diseases and ailments. Despite his many tyrannical qualities, Henry wasn't all that bad. He actually improved English medicine due to his outlandish paranoias, bringing the country further into the Renaissance. As the founder of the Royal College of Physicians, the king also passed 7 different laws to control the practice of medicine. In 1540, Henry pushed through one of the earliest laws to regulate drugs. Apothecary wares had to be checked to make sure no one was defrauding honest customers. His reign also contributed to the increase of supervision of sewers, thanks to his chancellor and future victim Sir Thomas More, who drastically improved the quality of London's public water supply. Starting with his entrusted and encrusted craftsman. In Henry's court, his servants vied to be as physically close to the king as possible at all times. In case you aren't aware, especially towards the end of his reign, Henry was a tad bit of a lunatic. The more he liked you, the less likely you were to die for looking at him funny on a bad day of his. But naturally, the monarch reserved the honor of being close to his royal person only for a trusted few people, the grooms of the stools. No, not his counselor, personal butler, none of his advisors, the guy that wiped his ass. And during his reign, only 4 men got the gig of groom of the stool, the most physically intimate position and therefore the most honored of his attendants. These grooms not only helped dress and undress the king before and after the bathroom and, handled the poop brush for him, but in an insane twist, they also controlled public and personal access to the monarch and some of his finances. They even had power over a stamp of the king's signature, which is a major financial tool. Imagine being one of his wives and having to ask the guy who wipes your husband's if you can talk to him, and he says no. But if he could afford that kind of luxury employee, why was he called the copper-nosed king? Easy. While Henry's kingdom amassed a great wealth and property during the English Reformation by confiscating Catholic monasteries, Henry then turned around and drove England into debt with his overspending and lavish lifestyle. Dude was a complete eclectic, and he wanted to buy everything shiny and pretty he saw, so he did. It's reported by the time he dropped, Henry owned approximately 50 palaces, 6,500 plus weapons, 70 ships, 78 recorders, 78 flutes, 5 sets of bagpipes, and a virginal. Get your mind out of the gutter, it's a type of harpsichord. Not to mention the millions of dollars he pumped into wars with Scotland and France. So it's pretty obvious he was burning through the kingdom's funds, and by the end of his reign, Henry had it down to the pocket change, quite literally. He was forced to lower the percentage of silver in the British coinage to the point that they were mostly copper with the silver coating that wore away from the coin's embossed image of Henry's face, starting with the nose. Thus, copper nose. When Henry's son Edward took the throne, the royal coffers were in a real bad state. But before we get to his love life and kiddos, let's learn about how frisky runs in the family. It's well known that Henry's older brother, the first husband of Henry's first wife, Catherine, died young. But did you know he had 2 royal sisters who made his life a living hell for fun? Henry's older sister Margaret was just as feisty as her brother. She was sent to Scotland to marry that country's king, James IV, at just 13. She did produce an heir after a couple years, the future James V, but her crappy adulterous playboy spouse didn't live terribly long. So, as a single queen, Margaret wanted to keep up her luxe lifestyle at her brother Henry's expense, which he did not love. Maggie battled it out with the Scottish nobles over the right to serve as her son's regent, but she fell for and married another Scottish noble, the Earl of Angus. Henry's other sister, Mary, had some equally troublesome marriage issues, at least for Henry. He married her first to the elderly King Louis of France, but that monarch passed away very shortly after. A smart woman who recognized being married to a literal senior could kind of work in her favor made Henry promise her before her marriage if she was to be widowed, her next husband would be a man of her own choosing. Henry agreed, which hilariously was a bad idea but only for him because now a widow, Mary chose to wed a commoner who was Henry's best friend, Charles Brandon. The king was furious that Mary would marry against his will since he had no intention of keeping his promise to her, and that her second wedding took away the opportunity for him to make alliances using her. But Mary and Brandon told him to suck it and stayed married till her death. Their descendants included the Lady Jane Grey, the infamous 9-day queen. Number 7 is a mouthful, Nebuchadnezzar II. One of the greatest Babylonian kings, who I'll be calling Neb for my own sake, won battles against Egypt and Assyrians in his quest to make Babylonia the most powerful city-state. He gained control of trade in Mesopotamia from Syrian and Palestinians. He was powerful and tactical, and for 7 years
years, he wandered open fields convinced he was an ox. This tale of insanity is documented in the Bible. According to Daniel 4:25, Neb had a disturbing dream in which his interpreter told him it meant, "You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched in the dew of the heavens." This prophecy fulfilled itself 12 months later when Neb fled from civilization suddenly. It's quoted he began eating grass like an ox. He became wet from dew. His hair grew long like feathers of an eagle and his nails grew long like claws of a bird. Then at the end of that time, which was 7 years as mentioned, he says, "I am I'm Neb. I looked up toward the heaven and I was right in my mind again." Ironically, there's actually a medical term for this. Boanthropy is a psychological disorder where a sufferer believes they are a cow or ox. So I guess this happened enough times for a term. Number 6 is a wacky dude, Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire. Ibrahim's scandals are more ridiculous than empire crumbling. He was known for a deep, passionate love of plus-size women. Not in a I like 'em thick kind of way, but Ibrahim's juices started flowing for obese women. So this sultan had his agents track down the largest woman in the entire Ottoman Empire, said to have weighed about 280 to 300 pounds. The sultan was so delighted by her he gave her a high government salary and the title of governor of Damascus. Also the cute nickname Seke Pere, which translated means a piece of sugar. Ibrahim wasn't even fully right in his mind before taking the throne. In the Ottoman Empire, it was normal for sultans to slaughter their entire family to ensure there are no corruption or attempts for the throne. Ibrahim's older brother actually let him live because he seemed so mentally ill, even as a prepubescent, to ever even be a threat to the throne. Which, by the way, Ibrahim only ever got because his brother died prematurely without heirs. So after drowning 280 concubines for having another man touch them and feeding tons of gold coins to fish in his palace pool and some other weird stuff, his reign was cut short when a coup led by the Ottomans' highest religious leader, as well as his 6-year-old son, had him strangled. Number 5 is the Zhengde Emperor of China. He is remembered as a notorious leader of the Ming Dynasty for both his wild behavior and his cruelty. His biggest scandal surrounded the poor decision to leave senior eunuch Liu Jin in charge of the state's affairs. This causes unseemly taxes and poverty and unnecessary acts of aggressions, things the general public, tend to hate. The two finally fell out after 2 years and Liu was sentenced to slow slicing, a particularly graphic, drawn-out, torturous death I don't recommend you look into without a strong stomach. Oh, and on top of that, he would waste the resources of his kingdom to play pretend. He would take the faux role of a general and went on raiding parties that were all dressed in silk. He even invented an imaginary best friend / alter ego named Zhu Shu. To the exasperation of the Chinese government, he actually made them address this imaginary friend or watched as he ordered it on pointless raiding missions. Ironically, it's rumored sometimes he'd even put on a wig to represent his own alter ego and have the courts address him as Zhu Shu. Eventually, Zhengde the emperor unexpectedly dies at the age of 29 shortly after he drunkenly fell off of a boat and contracted some fatal disease in the Yellow River. Number 4, we can't talk scandal without Caligula. The emperor of Rome, he was born in 12 AD and lived to 41 AD. Caligula spent his time on the throne building lavish projects, exercising his sadism and brutality, and exhibiting eccentric behavior at any chance. Also cheating. So much cheating on his wife. Well, wives. 4 wives. Caligula sucked at settling down, and his proclivity for both genders apparently made it no easier. He was known to seduce senators' wives right in front of them, bring home working girls, and engage in affairs with theater acts, specifically a dude named Menster. He also happened to love banging his sister. These did not win him public favor. Caligula is said to have banned the mention of goats in his presence due to his hairy appearance, and also practiced facial contortions to make himself be terrifying to his subjects. He was obsessed with his horse, building an entire castle and attempting to appoint the steed to the high office of consul, and he once even had his army construct a 2-mile floating bridge just so it could gallop along it. After 5 years of this, his own army kills him. His unforgivable mistake was to jeopardize Rome's military reputation by declaring a sort of surreal war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to wade in, slash at the waves with their swords and spears, and carry chests full of seashells away as spoils of a victory over the god Neptune. Number 3 is Emperor Zhejiang of China. He's actually the cousin of the previously mentioned Zhengde Emperor, a family that scandals together stays together. And man, did this guy have some ideas. From dabbling in Taoism, he became obsessed with the legendary elixir of immortality and believed that collecting the menstrual blood of female virgins and using it to make a substance called red lead would give him powers that would enable him to live forever. Over 20 of these poor concubines were held directly for this purpose, as well as for his exploitations. They were only fed mulberry leaves and rainwater to keep them pure and faced harsh living situations. In 1542, 16 of these concubines emotionally broke and planned a coup. They were seconds from success had one of the conspirators not panicked and backed out, running to snitch to the Empress. The Emperor was unconscious for over 24 hours, and so the Empress decided to deal out the punishments on her own and gave the 16 girls the terrible death sentence of slow slicing. Also, their family members beheaded and others taken into forced servitude. One of the concubines she'd sentenced, however, was the Emperor's favorite, so when a fire broke out a couple years later in their temple, he actually let his wife perish in order she not be saved. Apparently, she'd always been too old for his perverted taste. The Emperor died in 1567 at the age of 59. It's been widely speculated he succumbed to the toxic mercury contained in the elixirs of immortality that he had been ingesting over his lifetime. Number 2 is Charles III. He ruled from the time he was 12 in 1380 to his death in 1422, whilst under the 100-Year War of England was at its peak. Naturally, this is a horrible time to have someone dubbed Charles the Mad on the throne. In 1392, he shows his first red flags of instability when he suddenly turns on his own knights during a manhunt and starts attacking his own advisor. It took several knights to subdue him and carry him back to the castle. It's all downhill from there. While they had assumed it was stress that caused that outburst, in the following years, it would prove otherwise. He began to forget people's names and roles, including his own. He would forget where he was, even that he was king. Maybe this was because he spent so much time running around the castle on all fours pretending to be a wolf and howling at people. By the time Charles was convinced he was made of glass and banned people from touching him lest he break, well, his family had written him off. But now there were multiple sides vying for that throne. So during the 100-Year War, civil war breaks out in the French monarchy between Charles's brother and cousin. This allowed England and other countries an immense upper hand in invasions, and so by the time Charles dies, much of France was occupied by foreign powers. And number 1 is Emperor Rudolph II. This guy was a known disaster. He was elected as the Holy Roman Empire in 1576 when he was already experiencing deep depression and mania. He also immediately tore up the religious settlement that for the past 20 years had kept Germany's Catholics and Protestants away from each other. Ending all peace, he embarked on a crusade to eradicate Protestantism from Germany's towns and villages, restarting an unnecessary war that had already been finished. Protestants' response was fast and strong, a self-defense league, alongside Hungarians rising in revolt and Turkish also taking an offensive. Rudolph ran his up to Prague Castle and hid, refusing to speak to anyone. This scandal has the Habsburgs replace Rudolph with his brother Matthias, who undoes all the damage by restoring religious peace to Germany and signing treaties with the Turkish and Hungarians. Rudolph has a tantrum over this and starts the Turkish War again. So the Bohemians appealed to Matthias again for help, and in 1611 Rudolph was forced to hand power over to his brother once and for all. He died a year later, only after laying the foundation for the disastrous 30 years of war that would tear Europe apart within 6 years of his death.
At number 10, Caligula. This guy reigned for 4 years, and the amount of straight up excess he demanded led him to be the first Roman emperor to be assassinated. Caligula was 25 years old when he took power in 37 AD, and he was great. He announced political reforms and recalled all exiles, but within the same year he contracted an illness that sent him a little loopy. Like to the degree of ordering hundreds of Roman merchant ships to form a 2-mile floating bridge across the Bay of Bauli so he could spend 2 days galloping back and forth across it on his horse Incitatus. Oh, speaking of his horse, he loved that animal so much, giving him his own house with a marble stall and ivory manger. And he almost appointed the horse consul before Caligula met his end. It got worse in the years after his demise, like in 39 and 40 AD when he led campaigns to the Rhine and the English Channel, where he actually avoided battles and instead did things like commanding his troops to plunder the sea, which means gathering shells in their helmets. The perfectly sane kind of things that you do when your favorite quote is, "Remember that I have the right to do anything to anybody." Number 9, Ramses II. He literally has the most statues of himself of all the 4,000 years of Egyptian pharaohs. That is really all I gotta say, actually. Ramses II was undoubtedly the greatest pharaoh. I don't know if that justifies his spoiled ways, but it helps explain them at the very least. He was a master builder, a war hero, and brokered peace all around over his crazy long reign. But he was also really good at the whole propaganda thing. Like I said, he has statues of himself all over Egypt that even to this day are hard to avoid. not to mention all the buildings built in his name, including a whole temple to himself and one to one of his wives, Nefertari. He moved the capital from Thebes to the new capital he created, named, unsurprisingly, Pi Ramses, from which he ruled for 67 years, had literally hundreds of children and dozens of wives. He also, kind of hilariously, renovated statues and temples erected by previous pharaohs with his tag, either to pay respect or, what I'm going to go with, just to say, look at this big statue of some other dude, but always remember, trademarked by Ramses the Great. P.S. I'm awesome. Number 8. William II. Usually being overshadowed by his father William the Conqueror and his successor Henry I, William II wasn't a well-liked king, particularly by the church, because William kept positions for bishops empty so he could take their incomes, which made me laugh when I read it actually. The Archbishop of Canterbury Anselm really had an issue with William, even going into exile until William ceased to live. But this just left the revenues of the Archbishop of Canterbury vacant, making William able to claim those funds as well until the end of his reign. He obviously was not a fan of the church, but his armies definitely were a fan of him. He was great when it came to warfare, and was able to pretty much guarantee loyalty by showing it. William didn't have any heirs or wives, which led people to question his preferences, if you know what I mean. He ultimately met his end at the tip of an arrow during a hunting accident, but he was always remembered for being ruthless and giving in to his vices.
Number 7. Caligula's Wife. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, or really enjoys building Legos. Nice TIE fighter, babe, way to go. Yeah. Emperor Caligula of Rome liked to put his wife on a pedestal, literally. And while on this pedestal, she was wearing nothing but her birthday suit. Oh boy. While all of his friends, politicians, generals got to gawk and stare at her, and in some weird goth power flex, he would oftentimes hold a knife to her and tell her that he could just end her life whenever he wanted because he can do that. Not to mention the guy had a complete narcissist complex, building statues of himself everywhere just so she can like, oh great, there he is again, it's him again. Number 6. Kangaskhan. I bring the man up again because he's responsible for so much loss, so much blood spill, so much pain. Sure, they were effective warriors and archers, but they were brutal, dude, especially him. They took what they wanted when they wanted, and it's said that he was responsible for so many lives lost that it affected the carbon footprint of the planet. Dude, that's insane. That is literally insane. Also to note his treatment of rather, mistreatment of women. YouTube won't let me say much, but I can tell you that these ladies were not inviting him into their bedrooms. It wasn't good. As it stands today, because of his bedroom misconduct, his DNA still lives on. 5% of men worldwide share his DNA. Number 5. Pedro of Castile. Pedro of Castile was doing as the European monarchs do. Sometimes you gotta marry for alliances. Sure, it makes sense. Your kingdom is much less likely to get steamrolled by a larger kingdom if you have an alliance with fellow kingdoms, or the bigger kingdom itself actually. Pedro of Castile married the young Blanche of Bourbon of France, and so Spain could just be a wee bit more snug, in case the English come over. You gotta be careful. But Pedro just wasn't having it. What he was having instead was a mistress named Maria. So instead of enduring a loveless marriage, he had poor Blanche locked away in a tower, just like Sleeping Beauty. Except a handsome prince was not coming to rescue this damsel in distress, but a man with a black hood and a sharpened axe. You know what I'm talking about. As Pedro had her unalived. I was gonna make a joke about Rapunzel and let down some hair so she could make an escape, but I mean that's just awful, really. Imagine being locked up in a tower for so long. Sure, I love the indoors, but you gotta let me out at some point, Chief. Do you think I get food delivery apps to work up in a tower? Because otherwise you have to let me out, dude. Comic-Con's coming. Anime Convention North's coming, buddy. I gotta go. Gotta get my Naruto on, bro. Come on, man. Number 4. Handson Funeral. This one's just gross. When you're in a relationship, it can provide you with some great things. Someone to go through life with. Companionship. Love. And if you're lucky, someone who's a good cook or a baker. Oh, love me some baked goods. However, also in a relationship, sometimes you do more than that. Sometimes you get a little close under the sheets, if you know what I'm saying. Take King Philip V, for an example, who loved loving his wife so much that, he just couldn't help himself, you know? Like for instance, when his wife tragically passed away, he wanted one last ride. but he penciled in one more trip to Toe Curl City before she was laid to rest. I just, God, that doesn't seem right, you know? That just, let her go peacefully, you know? Let her just, Number 3, Lenin. Okay, while not a king in the most stereotypical sense, he did dethrone a king and made himself an autocratic dictator, which is basically a king just modern. Trust me, it is. Yep, trust me. In a nutshell, Lenin had been anti-royal for most of his life, but after some help from some sneaky Germans and other Soviets loyal to his cause, the Tsar had no choice but to abdicate, like I said at the top of the list. He abolished the Tsar's secret police and then put in his own. And had people oppressed, which was one of the main reasons why the whole revolution started in the first place. See what I'm getting at? He was supposed to get rid of the evil monarch, and he became the evil monarch. Well, see, then a civil war broke out, and then he was worried that the exiled Tsar might escape and try to retake the throne, and, well, he had some goons take care of him, and, well, the family too. You can never be too sure. You gotta take care of everything. You gotta get rid of everybody. You just can't be too sure. Number 2, Pope John XII. For those who aren't very religious like myself, the Pope is the big one. He's next to God, and for a minute there, he was the most powerful man on earth. Seriously, I mean, this guy could crown kings. He's the king of the Vatican and the king of kings in the Holy Scripture. It's kind of serious. And today he's got a really cool car for parades. The Popemobile is pretty sick, not gonna lie. However, Pope John XII was anything but a sweet old man who delivers the holy messages from God. This Pope was doing a lot of anti-Pope behavior, if you will. Now, I for one wouldn't care if the man had a girlfriend or a glass of wine. Heck, some rules need to be changed, but this Pope was most known for his lavish, how you say, adult-themed parties, and was known for getting hangovers. It got so bad at one point, it started a war. Number 1, not so slick shady. Marshall Mathers, Eminem, the king of rap, and named king of hip hop by Rolling Stones magazine. Hence he's a king, I gotcha. Despite what you think of the man's lyrics, especially vulgarity, he's an excellent wordsmith and could write rhymes that would leave you tongue twisted. However, I don't think it would come to anyone's surprise that the man's got a few charges under his belt, especially the way he talks about Kim. There's a couple bad things said about her, I don't know. Back in 2001, arguably the peak of his career, Eminem assaulted somebody in a nightclub after getting fresh with his wife. He got 2 years probation. Maybe he is saying the things he's saying in those songs. Maybe he's telling the truth. I don't know.
Kicking off the list at number 10, a fool. While ancient kings have all the riches one man can possibly have, it's still somehow never enough. Kings also have their own walking, talking party. Yeah, how fun is that? The earliest accounts of the fool go back to the 11th century. These fools were hired to liven up the party. Most of you may have an image of a jester in your head, just jumping around on tables, telling jokes, juggling with big pointy shoes, wearing pajamas. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It was pretty fun. One of the best jobs to have was the title of a minstrel, or a fool. It was an honor to have, really, and the fool's payment was no joke. Roland Le Picheur was rewarded with 30 acres of land from King Henry II, as long as he showed up to court every year on Christmas Day to fart. Literally, he would show up and fart around. But these fools also held responsibility in their silly little lips. Fools needed to find the balance of humor and wit. It was harder back then than anything. Many of these jesters were given the role of advisor to the king and queen. The phrase, "don't shoot the messenger," this is where it comes from. The jester would have to tell them horrible news, but in a fun, positive way. For example, back in 1340, King Philip IV, his fleet was destroyed in naval battle, the British completely wiped them out, and it was an otherwise devastating loss, but the jester, the fool, brought this news in a light way. He said to the king, "They don't even have the guts to jump into the water like our brave French do." And then he farted and disappeared.
Number 9, access to clean water. Today in a modern world, there are things that we just can't live without. A vape pen, Starbucks, and that weird looking back massager that everyone says they bought for their backs, but it's actually for their undercarriage. Speaking of undercarriages, you don't want to drink from the water from underneath one. Dirty, muddy street water is bad for your health. The ancient kings of old knew this. It was common knowledge that drinking dirty water could lead to you spending more time squatting over a hole than spending time with your family, and nobody wants that. Life for citizens who were not royals could have it pretty rough. Ancient kings had the luxury of having clean water, or somewhat, it's still kinda not so clean, or at least more clean than the commoners. Through methods of fresh spring water, boiling, and even some early filtration methods, they had access to better water that wouldn't make their guts hurt. With that being said, a lot of times given the sussy nature of water, a lot of kings just drank alcohol, which honestly might have saved them since the alcohol could possibly kill harmful bacteria. The one time in life that boozing might save your life. Anyone got a beer?
Number 8, ladies first. These ancient kings, they could literally do whatever they wanted. And it's important to note how they would act if they didn't get what they wanted, right? Like George IV of England, he's referred to as England's worst king by historians. Great title, even worse than King Joffrey. What do you know? It's one thing to spiral into debt, that's classic king behavior. MC Hammer went broke, we get it, it happens. But George IV, he was all about the ladies, a little bit too much. All he wanted in life was just to hook up with women, that was it, his only desire in life. And if they weren't interested, George was known to throw fits. He would cry and stomp his feet, literally. You know how those brave and bold kings do? George would offer these ladies money, although they weren't for sale, so that wasn't a great plan and didn't work a lot of the time. And George would go so far to threaten his own well-being if they refused. How terrible is that guy, right? Just imagine that conversation, how insane. What takes this to the absolute next level though is that George would keep a lock of his partner's hair after they had spent the night together. Now I know you're freaking out, maybe you're like, huh? Maybe you just choked on your rye bread sandwich a bit, that's more than fair. At the time, this wasn't abnormal behavior. I mean, you know, lovers would exchange their hair instead of phone numbers, I get it, it's back in the old days. But George, he had a lot of hair. He had like a lot of hair. He had like 7,000 envelopes filled with hair. I'm over here exchanging phone numbers at the club. Like, what am I doing wrong? Am I, doink? Call me, peace.
Number 7, Elvis Presley. Lots of similarities today. Elvis Presley, before Michael Jackson, he was probably the most famous person to ever exist. The king of rock and roll, baby, that's right. All I'll say is phone your grandma and ask her how she feels about him. She probably says she loves his music and those gyrating hips. At the time, it was pretty controversial. Boy, only if they knew what was going on today. Whew. Sorry 50s atomic families. Well, being that Elvis Presley was the king and the first celebrity to be idolized the way we do with modern celebrities, he became quite wealthy. Well, with all that money, he bought some weird things, including a chimp. Everyone's buying a monkey, they want a zoo, I don't know. A mansion property he named Graceland, a pink Cadillac for his mother, and strangely enough, he bought FDR's yacht. Yeah, what? That's so weird. Good president, sure, but does it really have room for a monkey in a pink Cadillac? I don't know. Number 6, French royalty. This one is more about Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. It's kind of like a two-pack, kind of like a couple, but trust me, it all makes sense in the end. Again, anything they bought, it was probably the king's wallet, wasn't it? Okay, so when your country is starving, demanding more rights, and in general, life really sucks, what's the next best thing you do? Buy a $12 million necklace. Yeah, right, okay, I've said that before, sure. Okay, Chad, what else? Continue to live your opulent life on the king's and people's dimes. Sure, why not? It makes sense, okay. I'm talking too much. Well, something I learned today and something that Taylor showed me is that I guess the last queen of France was a little lonely. So what did King Louis do to fix this? Spend more time with her? Nay. Buy her a new dog? Nay, sir and madams. He had her pug from Austria imported to the country. And anyone can tell you that when something is imported, you are going to be dishing out a few more dosh. Yes, that's right. They imported her pug from Austria. Imagine how that sounds when your house is literally falling apart, you're starving, and you pay the most taxes. Makes you want to put heads on pikes. That's what it makes you want to do. Can you imagine that? We're all poor and hungry. She's like, oh, look at my dog. It's my dog. They're French, they don't sound like that, but this is my dog, look at my dog, here he is. Number 5, King of Egypt. His Majesty Farouk I, by the grace of God, King of Egypt and the Sudan, that was his full title, was disposed during his nation's 1952 revolution and spent the remainder of his days in exile to Italy. In his haste to avoid getting the Mussolini treatment, he left behind a majority of his most prized possessions. When the people got a look at what he was storing behind the walls of his residence, they were a bit disgusted to find an excessive number of expensive suits, rare stamps and coins, jewels, luxury vehicles, and many other things that I will never afford. Now, what else would he have that would be considered strange? I'll let you take a guess. Was it A, a blam blam cachet, B, piles and piles of a white substance that made the 80s fun, or C, an unsettling amount of gardening magazines? Go ahead and let us know in the comments below. I'll give you a second. Nope, time's up. If you said secret option D, you'd be right. What was it, you ask? Well, it was a disturbing amount of adult entertainment. So much so, it wouldn't even fit underneath his mattress. Man, that's a lot. That's too much. That's too much. Number 4, Peter III. Remember the last time you played with your toys as a kid? Same. And let us know what your favorite toys were as a kid. Let's see if we have some shared favorites. I'm actually curious. That's kind of a cool thing to talk about. Well, for Peter III, it was little army men, or tin soldiers, I guess you'd call them. And yes, he played with them as an adult, staging mock battles. Is it the weirdest thing ever? No, it's not. But he was a king, so that's a wee bit strange. Hey, I love army men just as much as the next guy, especially those little green plastic dudes. I used to love those video games too. Very underrated in my opinion. I love that stuff. It also makes me think of that scene in Spaceballs. Enough references aside, you never really know someone until you've seen the money they've spent on their army men collection. Number 3, Ibrahim I. Fur everywhere. Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire was the 18th Sultan and the #1 purchaser of fine furs. Personally, I've never had any fine furs. I grew up in the trailer park and Mama always said that fur was cruel anyway, so I never felt the luxury of fine furs, if you will. It must be nice because Ibrahim loved them so much. Like, he really loved them. His whole wardrobe consisted of them, in fact. Plus, his walls were covered in them, and apparently even his curtains. I don't do well in heat, so I'll pass on that. I'd be sweating way too much. Too much fur. Number 2, the locksmith. Who are you and how'd you get in here? I'm the locksmith. And I'm the locksmith. Classic Leslie Nielsen. God, I love that guy. I love those movies. I'd love to make one day. Or star in one. Hollywood, call me. King Louis XVI, the last king of France. We're back to him again. The man spent his time and money on something rather strange. No, not all was spent on his wife and her life. And yeah, I'm kind of putting him on the list twice, but trust me, it's weird. I mean, come on, he gave the queen whatever the heck she wanted. Well, apparently he loved to spend his time and money on locksmithing. What? Yeah, that's so weird. He would spend his time trying to get into locks and understand them. He was also stated as saying that every man should have a passion. Hey, maybe put down the locks and start helping the people as a passion. There's an idea. What a great idea. Feed the people. Instead, I'm just going to work on this lock. I'm just going to go ahead and almost got it. Yep. Number 1, Christian VII of Denmark. I saw this and I just had to put it on here. I mean, come on. Apparently the guy wasn't very mentally stable. I mean, who is these days? Apparently the royal spent a lot of his time waxing his carrot, polishing the flagpole, tenderizing the gabagoo, charming the snake, self-firing on all cylinders, the one-handed bedroom dance, what I did all summer long in high school. You get the point, okay? You understand what I'm trying to say. Truth of the matter is, you don't get there with a little help from Vaseline or St. Ives. The man bought time so he could be this way. The man is either a legend or a crazy person. Imagine having that much money and that much time in your day that's all you do.
Kicking off the list at number 10, must love licorice. Okay, we'll start off a little tame. Napoleon Bonaparte, the famous French emperor, the famous military leader from the 1800s. Napoleon Bonaparte was responsible for conquering a large part of Europe. Bet you didn't know he was obsessed with licorice though. Way too much. He would eat this all day, every day. Ugh, it feels gross. Look, as somebody who can't stand licorice, I already feel bad for Josephine. Licorice breath at any time of the day coming your way? No thank you. I'll hard pass. Napoleon carried licorice around with him at all times. This guy ate so much of it, his teeth became stained. They turned black. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's black licorice too. Not the strawberry pull-and peels, those are great. I'm talking about 1800s black licorice. It would come in lozenges. If somebody offered me a lozenge and it was black licorice, I'd call the police. Smack it out of their hands. Number 9, George IV. When it was time for King George III to pass on the crown, of course, next in line, heir to the throne, is his eldest son, also named George. What if you became king in 1820? Would you be noble? Would you do monologues in the sunset as you enriched your homeland? Kings like to do that a lot with their if I had the hair still. Or would you do what King George IV did and make horrible financial decisions every single day? The guy would just party all day as well. He would gamble every day, he would buy expensive stuff that he did not need, and on top of that, he would never do any of his royal duties. Guy wouldn't do his job. His father had to step in, classic. He figured the only way to settle all these new debts set in motion by George IV, in order to clear those up, George now has to marry his cousin, Caroline of Brunswick. The arranged marriage happened April 8th, 1795, and what was supposed to be a happy day for all was a nightmare for all included. They hated each other as soon as they met. I mean, obviously, he was a fool. George got heavily intoxicated for the wedding. He was just hammered the entire time. And then 9 months later, almost to the day, they had a child. And then right after that happened, they went their separate ways. So yeah, horribly unhealthy relationship. Once George became king in 1820, he then tried to divorce her. Like, what a fool. Just let it go. Let it all go. Let her go. Number 8. Filippo Maria Visconti. The Duke of Milan during the 14th century was at first Gian Maria Visconti, but after he was taken out, his brother Filippo Maria Visconti had to step up to the bat. As a ruler, Filippo was better. His brother had been cruel previously, hence the untimely departure. So this was a good move at first, so we thought. Now Filippo had to take over come 1412. Filippo was better than his brother on paper. He helped reorganize government finances. He got the silk industry up and running, which we love that. He ended up passing away of natural causes down the road, which is, nothing like his brother. But while he was in power, he never showed his face to anybody, not even people close to him. He hid in his palace most of the time, and it was odd because he thought that he was ugly. That's why he hid his face. Kind of sad, right? Filippo hid his face, and maybe you feel bad for him now, right? Just a little bit. He died of natural causes and he was alone all that time. Yeah, don't feel bad for him. This guy was horrible. He was jealous of his wife Beatrice Lascaris de Tenda because she was twice his age, twice as smart, and twice as powerful. So Filippo had her taken out in a courtyard publicly September 13th, 1418. Yeah, he accused her of adultery just cause he could, and he had some suspicions in his dark room by himself hiding his face. History is ugly, and sometimes it's literally ugly as well.
Number 7. Food. Nice. Whether you like it or not, at some point in your life you're gonna have to eat, and if you're like me, that means all the time. Steaks, ribs, beer, Burger King, pizza, pasta, ham, and chicken wings. Nice. It should be no surprise that I like beer and barbecue, and to answer your question, yes, I am the most fun guy to be around at the barbecue. Why? I just like to have fun and I like to eat good food, man. That's just it. Imagine a world, however, where there is no pizza and chicken wings. I know, it's horrible, right? Ugh. Food was always a concern of commoners in ancient times, and as much as I love meat, it wasn't always available. They just didn't live in the industrial agricultural world that we live in today. For Romans, it was a steady diet of breads and nuts, and if they were lucky, maybe some cheese or soup. But for the kings and emperors of old, well, if you feel like vomiting after all you can eat buffets, it makes you feel, some first world kind of guilt, then look no further than ancient kings. Food might be the most excessive way they live, really. All kinds of meats all the time, beer, wine, fresh fruit and vegetables, which for health reasons is pretty huge, and to make them huge, maybe even some desserts. The Egyptians, for example, were known for their sweets. And now I'm hungry. We should go to a banquet together.
Number 6. 6,000 knights. Being a medieval knight, obviously, it sounds cool. They have the sword, the horse, the flowing hair, all that good stuff. They're saving the damsel in distress in some sort of tower. Well, no, it actually sucked being a knight at all. First of all, chainmail. You know how heavy chainmail is alone by itself? It's like 55 pounds. All that chainmail underneath your armor, no way. My body, this Q-tip spine would just break in half. No way. I can't even get on a horse wearing jeans and a shirt, let alone chainmail. Being a knight is something that starts when you're 7 years old as well. You gotta start as a little tot, a little royal tot. Then you'd be given to a noble to learn and be wise for 7 years, some, Yoda type scenario. And then at age 14, you become a squire. A knight's intern, not an ideal job to have when you're 14, but if you stick it out just 7 more years, then you're an official ting, ting, knight. That's it. But then what? Do kings have 2 knights? Do they have 4 each? Is it like a breakdance squad? Is it like 8s, groups of 8s? Like, how do we do this? Henry II of England could call up to 6,000 knights. This was back in the late 12th century. That's a lot of backup. That's a lot of shiny, majestical backup. My favorite knight still to this day, I don't care, Martin Lawrence.
Jamal, Scott, Walker.
FBI, what's up? What's happening, y'all?
Number 5, big money. This is no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, but back in the day, I'd argue the division between wealth and poor was larger than today. Kings had it all. I mean, if you listen to what Taylor's saying, he knows what he's talking about. Food, water, power, what else is there? Well, how about the coinage to make it all happen? The bread, the guap, the dosh, and my favorite, the cheddar. Yes, that's right, the ancient king's wealth. Whatever they didn't already possess, they could take by force, or simply just bought with incalculable riches. With uncalculable riches. So much money. They had so much money. I can't make it clear. They had a lot of money. A great example of this was Mansa Musa, a very wealthy king from the Mali Empire. It's speculated he might have been the wealthiest person to ever walk the face of the earth. Earning his riches through the trading of gold and salt, he decided to show the international community how rich he was, and went on tour, because that's just something you do when you have millions of dollars, I guess. Where in multiple cities he spent and gave away so much gold that it upset the city's economies. That is a big flex, okay. Donald Trump might have hotels, but Mansa Musa has everything else. It's kind of like Monopoly when one player has a boatload of cash and they go from one good property to the next. So if they land on something, they got all the cold hard cash to deal with it. Plus, they also have some good property and they just make it back every turn anyway. I'm fed up with Monopoly.
Number 4. King of Castles. King Ludwig II had numerous castles built to resemble fairy tale castles. Yeah, let's call this inspiration, I guess. What a privilege this ought to be. Ludwig was only 18 when he became the King of Bavaria back in 1864, and then he had castles built as, he was inspired from romantic literature and spending time at the opera. You hear that, Andrew? He was inspired after the opera. What a poet. It's crazy. Crazy. Must be nice, right? King Ludwig II would spend his nights in one castle, looking through his fancy telescope, admiring the next castle being built. What? He even freestyled the castle as well. Yeah, just 4 years in, the guy designed his own majestical castle. And to this day, it's one of the most photographed places in the world, so clearly he did something right. Neuschwanstein Castle, literal fairy tale, there we go. Meanwhile, I'm over here making castles in Minecraft. Still fun, we'll take it.
Number 3, jousting. First there is bread, and then there is wine, and then there is entertainment. You can't tell me while a delicious plate of nachos dances like a ballerina in your microwave, you didn't pull up some super cool content to watch on your phone. Maybe featuring a large, kinda funny comedian, and maybe also featuring a super handsome, tall, funny comedian with the neck thing, I don't know. Kings of ye olde times did not possess the power of the internet or watching fail videos, so watching combat sports was the next best thing. Oh, what's that I hear? Watching the sport isn't enough? Well, some royalty even got involved. King Henry VIII, for example, just loved to joust because he did. He even had an accident with such, and it's what might have made him gone mad in the first place.
Number 2, banning coffee. This is the worst of the worst, people. Here we go. Morad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, the guy banned coffee. What a monster. I would be asleep right now if coffee wasn't a thing. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because he was so young and all. But when he got a little older, he got a little wiser, he put forth these laws, punishable by death, may I add, in order to get things back on track. That was the key. The guy banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. What a fun guy. He would actually disguise himself as a civilian at nighttime and then wander around aimlessly in hopes that he would find one of these dark roast renegades just wandering the roads. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you didn't get fined, but rather Morad IV himself would just take off his hood and be like, surprise, and then he would take off your head. Right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. All that for some stale ale. What a monster.
Number 1, groom of the stool. For some reason, this job was considered to be higher up, a well-respected job, if you will. However, I'd like to ask the man in charge of such an operation how he felt. I can imagine he wasn't too fond of his job. Hands never clean, hands never cleaned. The groom of the stool is someone who would assist the king in his bathroom duties by supplying fresh water, towels, and whatever a king needs. He may have also been responsible for cleaning the forbidden starfish. May the divines of Skyrim have mercy on his soul. I guess this had to be done, but I don't know if I could ever even do that to another human being. If you've ever eaten Taco Bell late at night and washed it down with some Baja Blast, then you know the kind of explosion awaits the porcelain throne in the morning. So yes, having a servant present at your bowel movements is a privilege that most other folks just didn't have, but would you really want one? Number 10, King Midas. Most people know the story of King Midas, but in a nutshell, he was a king who was granted the power of everything he touched turned to solid gold. So, no, he didn't exactly buy anything with that kind of power, but the man can have anything he wants or buy anything he wants. It's a lot of gold. This sounds great, but it's really awful for a couple of reasons. One, that is pretty much the moral of the story, and the other is, well, some basic economy stuff. The first reason this would suck is that, one, you should never be too greedy, and you really shouldn't. And you should always be careful what what you wish for. This blessing quickly turned into a curse as Midas could no longer eat. Which, that's bad. Not eating and everything you touch turned to gold. Ugh, you couldn't hug anybody, it's terrible. The other issue would be his wealth. You'd have to be very careful on how many items you actually touched, as producing too much gold would eventually devalue the price of gold. Especially if you touch a bed or something, that's a lot of gold. Imagine how much a solid gold bed would weigh, or how much that would be worth. So in reality, you would be both starving and poor. Number 9, Mansa Musa. Sort of related to the King Midas issue, Mansa Musa was probably the richest man to ever walk the face of the earth. A king from northern Africa who exploited his country's salt and gold reserves. His estimated wealth today would be around the $400 billion mark. $400 billion US. Ooh, that's a lot of money. Tough to actually measure it exactly because it was from so long ago, but it could be less, and some say it could actually even be more. Mansa Musa went on tour one year to see all the beautiful things he could of the ancient world, and you can't take a little vacation without buying something at the gift shop. Mansa Musa was so rich and spent so much money in a few towns that he visited that he single-handedly upset the economy of those cities. Elon Musk wishes he could. So he basically bought a lot of stuff, and it was unusual because it upset the economy. Like, he destroyed the economy of those towns. That's insane. Number 8, Michael Jackson, the king of pop. Ah, see, I got you. I pulled a sneaky on you. But hey, he's still a king. And maybe he was the biggest celebrity who ever lived. Would Halloween really be Halloween without Thriller? And how could cool guys let you know they were cool in the 80s if they didn't have all that leather jacket and stuff? You wouldn't be able to know. You just wouldn't. Well, maybe some things you don't know about Michael Jackson were his shopping habits. The man loved shopping. And with that kind of money, well, you can do anything. Well, some may remember his chimp, his Neverland mansion complete with carnival rides, an arcade, and even an oxygen chamber in case Darth Vader was coming over to stay the night. However, something very strange the man tried to do was he tried to buy a very strange man himself, or rather his bones. For some reason, Michael had a fascination with the Elephant Man, a man with severe facial deformities and freak show performer from the late 1800s. Michael tried to purchase his remains. That's it. That's the point. He tried to buy him. They wouldn't let him, but he tried. That's a weird thing to buy. I've never, whenever I hit the number, I don't go, hey, 1-800 museum people, someone bring me King Tut. I want it.
Boy. Number 7, Queen Caroline. Queen Caroline. Ba ba ba. She went out in a horrible way. We can't sing about her. History remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she went out. It was bad. It was actually written down in an epigram attributed to the 18th century poet Alexander Pope. Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels. Again, it rhymes. Why is everything rhyming? This is so awful. Who can be like, yeah, write that down, that's good, that's good. Wait. It does rhyme, that's good, yeah, checks out. Rest in peace. My gosh, her husband, he was certainly no help at all. Caroline was previously married to George IV, and this guy locked her out of Westminster on Coronation Day. So yeah, she went out in a horrible way, but let's not forget the marriage that came beforehand. That wasn't pleasant either. Nothing in this guy or this marriage was pleasant. Number 6, Henry VIII. Of course he's back. He had 6 wives, and it was pretty much entirely bad for all of them, yeah. It was the late 1400s. Henry took the throne in 1509. This guy was only 17 years old when all of this madness began to unfold. Only days after the execution of Anne, who I mentioned on part 1 of this list, so days after he married his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour's mothers were first cousins, so they were close, and during all of this, they of course went head to head more than once. Jane died shortly after giving birth to Edward VI on October 12, 1537. I can't mention King Henry's wives and leave a couple out. This is just a history channel. We have to mention all of them, okay? Number 5, George V. Turned out this guy loved stamps. Maybe a bit too much though, I'd say. It was almost distracting. It was taking up many hours of his day. Like, focus on other things, like say maybe, I don't know, the war. King George V continued to collect stamps during World War I. Everyone's trying to stay alive. George is just in the background like... Like all collections, they started at an early age. It's now at a point where it's just, past impressive and borderline strange. Especially if you're a royal, like you're really going hard with this. This guy had albums on albums of stamps. He had around 330 albums, each was 60 pages, full of stamps. That's 20,000 pages full of stamps. That's a lot, way too many stamps. So naturally, he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather the King of Philately. That's the official term for collecting stamps. We're historians here, we have to make it official. Back in 1905, he set an all-time stamp record, Ho ho! The most money ever spent on a stamp. This guy dropped like 220,000 on one single stamp. Somebody even asked the prince down the road if he had heard about the fool who had spent 1,400 pounds on a stamp. And he was proud. He was like, oh, that fool? It was I. Number 4. Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector. Yeah, some princes collected stamps, others collect zoo animals. We're all different. Yeah, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and not bears, but orangutans, so good luck getting your 8 hours. He also collected human artifacts, like body parts after they've been, so that's watch your step, I guess. Welcome to MTV Cribs, don't mind the jar of eyes. Watch out for the lion's tail, careful. What a mess. He's quite important in history though, I guess. He supported the scientific revolution, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so next time you read your horoscope, remember it's Bones in the Jar Benny that's responsible for that one. And also, in case you're wondering, yeah, he didn't pay attention to any of his wives or anything like that. He was just, no, jars for me, jars animals, I'm all set. Number 3, Don Carlos. Spanish crown prince, the guy who just enjoyed being the worst human alive. Let's talk about him. Back in the mid-1500s, the eldest son to King Philip II of Spain was, yeah, I want to say worse things, but he was just a really bad person. YouTube, he was just a bad guy. Now, it's been noted that he was born with a hunchback and one leg was shorter than the other. Historians like to bring that up first, and how maybe he had the odds against him with these disabilities growing up, and people often feel bad for him a little. To that I say, don't. Nah, don't do it. Don Carlos was made hero of the opera by his dad. Dude was fine. Philip II of Spain? Yeah, he would hurt a lot of people. He would hurt animals and people just for fun. According to historians, Don Carlos once made a cobbler eat a pair of boots because he didn't like how the pair of boots looked. He made somebody eat boots. We're not gonna feel bad for him on Bumblebee today. That's not what we're gonna do. He was also set up to marry Queen Elizabeth of Valois, the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours, she was like, no, that's not gonna happen, no way. So she married his father instead. That's what happens. That's what happens when you're In 1564, a few brides were lined up for Don Carlos. Mary, Queen of Scots, was one of them. Margaret of Valois, we know what happened with her, and Anna of Austria. But his mental conditions grew worse and it went south. Shocker. Number 2, Heart of Glass. King Charles VI, once nicknamed the Beloved and then quickly nicknamed the Mad. What happened? After he became King of France in 1380, he would have these episodes, let's call them. He would believe he was made of glass and he didn't want anybody to touch him. He had this glass delusion, which was surprisingly not uncommon, believe it or not, for this time period. Believing you were made out of glass in some way, shape, or form, be it in your head, butt, shoulders, or back, really spiked around the mid-1400s, and Charles VI, aka Charles the Mad, he wouldn't let anybody, not even his wife, near him at all. I'm not making fun of somebody for having a fear like that. I mean, most likely historians believe he was schizophrenic, so obviously I'm not ripping on that. But Alexandria of Bavaria, another royal who had this glass delusion, she too believed she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass, so she had to enter rooms sideways to avoid it shattering. I don't know what's going on with this glass delusion, but I'm glad it went away. I don't know. And finally, number 1, King George IV. Voted as England's worst king by historians. So that should already tell you a good amount of this guy. George was another one of those monarchs who was a little too invested in his, intimate side quests, if you know what I'm saying here, like all these other kings we've talked about. He was a bit busy, being a stupid fool. This man was trying literally everything to get a woman to sleep with him. Although he was the king and he was already set up, he was like, nope, I'm gonna go and keep trying with strangers and random. And he would throw a tantrum if they said no, or he would threaten to end his own life if he didn't get the girl. Like, you know what I'm saying? One of those kind of monsters. He would also keep trophies, lack of a better term, of all these conquests afterwards. He would ask each people that he slept with for a little piece of hair, and then he would keep them. He would store them. Back then it was kind of common, I guess, for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair. Weirdly enough, because you don't have phone numbers or like any sort of way to remember someone, photos, I don't know. So you kept their hair. But after the king died, his brother found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair that was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa, end quote. So yeah, I'll leave you on that note. Kicking off the list at number 10, a goodnight kiss. We'll start off funny, okay? History can be funny sometimes, even when it's not meant to be, and it's meant to be completely serious. I can't help but read this information and laugh. Royals were sweating constantly about people trying to take them out, of course. I mentioned Boy Jones on here a few times. That guy stalked the queen over and over for years. Historically, these royals have been on the lookout for enemies, and the way that they prevent these attacks, yeah, sometimes it can be a little funny. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Have you heard about this weird position in the castle? What an odd job this is. A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned their ale, which is, pretty lousy job there. Either having a good day or a bad day, no in between. But they also had a guy kiss the king's sheets every day. He just kissed the entire bed. The king size, may I remind you, massive bed. King Henry VIII, this guy hired somebody to literally just go in, get snuggled up, and just make sure the king's bed wasn't poisoned. There's nothing on it that's gonna make the skin go all ouchy. But he would just get in his bed and just go to sleep for a bit. You are required to make the king's bed every morning, of course, and before he gets back in, you gotta get in and kiss that bed, man. You gotta kiss that bed real good. Mwah, mwah, let's go. Mwah. All right, time to clock out for the day. Mwah, one more for good luck. Clothes as well, that was touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure worn and touched. It's so weird. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed. No way, I'd rather get poisoned. Like, yo, take my jeans off. Who is that guy? Get back here. Like, imagine marrying that king and it's like, oh, hang on, before we get snugged in, this guy has to go and kiss your sheets. She's like, ew, what? Why does my sheets smell like breath? Everything smells like breath. Number 9, enemas. We gotta talk about perhaps one of the worst sights to see in the household. Back in the olden days, enemas were the talk of the town. Well, rather, the palace. Like most things in the 1400s, only the rich could afford the enema supplies. Specifically, King Louis XIV. Guy loved enemas. Just big old fan of enemas. It's believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. Thousands. It's a lot of decimals. Decimals for enemas. In just 1 year, Louis received 212 enemas. Like, guy, that's like 112 too much, I'd say. I don't know. He would always take it a step further, and dare I say, a step fancier, by using almond milk for the enemas. Imagine being married to a guy and he pulls out almond milk and you're like, oh no, not again. Come on, Louis, please, I just ate. Number 8, no bathing in this house. Bathing in the olden days wasn't fully understood, if that makes any sense. Like in a medical book, in an official 16th century medical book, the medical advice was, use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter and for to infect the blood. First of all, huh? What? What does it even mean? Why is every shred of medical knowledge always written in riddles? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor would just be like, ah yes, just a drop of ale and a witch's flick and you'll be on your way. Like, what? Do you have any halls? Help me. Help me, dude. No, I'm just mad. Bro, I have pneumonia. I need medicine. So of course, they thought that taking a bath would make you sick. Of course. So King James IV, apparently this guy never took a bath in his life. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass lice to others just by being in the same room that he was earlier. So not at the same time, he would come in, do his king stuff, leave, and the lice would be like, pew! And they would just wait in that room and get on someone else. That's so gross. That's horrible. Lice would emit off this man. He's like the stinky kid from Charlie Brown with the stinky cloud. That's just like lice around this guy. Margaret Tudor was married to King James. Yeah, must have loved the no bathing thing, eh? Number 7, George I. King George I, couple of Georges on this list, okay? Long before his British ruling days, George was in Germany. He was actually the elector there, and he'd been married before around 1682. Originally, he married Sophia Dorothea of Castile, but the entire time they were married, it was horrible. George would straight up bring other women home because he just felt like he could. Like he literally argued that he could, given his role. He's like, oh, I could have these women and we could do all this in front of you. Of course, I'm this person of this. Like, no, you're a fool. You're a jerk, really. He would have numerous mistresses and he would purposely flaunt them. So Sophia thought, okay, if you can have numerous side hustles going on, I'll move on myself. So she began seeing a Swedish count. Okay. She began seeing Philip Christoph von Königsmark. Now when George inevitably found out, he was violent at this point. He was upset, he divorced Sophia and then imprisoned her. Yeah, when he became king of Britain later on in 1714, she didn't come with him. Yeah, it's not just horrible with Sophia either. The Duke had also been taken out, sadly. His love for Sophia ended up getting him killed. What a mess. All these Georges are so messy, the worst. If your name's George, don't be a mess. Just be nice. Hit that thumbs up if you're a George. Change the game. Change the stats up. Number 6, Heir to the throne. Okay, I kicked out this list roasting Napoleon and his licorice choices, but of course, he's done much worse things than have bad breath and stained teeth. Napoleon's marriage to Josephine was first fueled by love and friendship, but things quickly changed. Marie-Josephine Rosé Tascher de la Pagerie was born in 1763. She had 2 children with her first husband, but that marriage was also not a happy time. They separated, and Josephine met Napoleon in 1795. Napoleon at this point was married at the time, and they had an affair, and they were deeply in love, like actually in love, and Napoleon proposed to Josephine in 1796, and they married later that year. 2 days after their wedding, Napoleon led the French army in Italy, and while he was gone, both of them ended up having affairs. So many affairs in this. Like, does love even exist? What the hell? 1804, Napoleon crowned himself and then crowned Josephine, proclaiming her empress. A few years passed, and after finding out Josephine couldn't bear any more children, Napoleon made a list of possible and eligible princesses. Just a list, and just left it out. Like, how awful is that? In November 1809, Josephine agreed to the divorce, and come 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte's final word on his deathbed was Josephine. Yeah, a little darker than a licorice, just a tad. Number 5, King Henry VIII. The second wife of King Henry VIII. She was found guilty of treason, and she had been charged with having relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend, and when I say close, I mean they were really close. He was the groom of the stool. So they were close, and on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. I wonder why. This list will explain a few reasons. Now, it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish. Anne wasn't present when these events even went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533, Your Honor. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill, May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her own little neck before being taken out with the sword herself. Yeah, all dark. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. How horrible is that? Number 4, a bit better. Another one of King Henry VIII's wives, Anne of Cleves. Where do we even begin here? This one's pretty sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, King Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister, and then come back and compare them. This is like the birth of Tinder. I'm not even joking, this is how he did it. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. Yeah, compared her to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site, write that in. I praiseth thou beauty, madam, to a silver dollar. A silver sea sand dollar shining in the moon. What? I don't know, just click it. Click send and see what happens. Then a treaty was signed. A few weeks later, Anne arrived to England, and Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like the portrait, apparently. How horrible is that? You look nothing like this Victorian painting. How dare you? It's 6 a.m. and you've been riding a horse for 4 weeks and you don't look like this Victorian painting? Shame. He tried to stop the wedding, but it was too late at that point, so they had to follow through. And on January 6, 1540, their marriage was official. You can't unswipe this marriage, rich boy. Anne later accepted the divorce gladly and then lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Number 3, Christian VII. Christian, there's an ironic name for what I'm about to tell you. The prince that couldn't keep his hands out of his pants. I don't know how else to say it. Here we go. Christian VII of Denmark. He was a young lad. He was spoiled. He was a little comfortable with his body, maybe too comfortable, and he would often just have his hands in his pants hanging out. He was like one of those, rich king. He was kind of like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. He would just sit back and like suck on candy and stuff and just, fool around. I don't know, it was gross. Middle of dinner, this guy would pass around food to his family with those gross hands. He would alternate hands and pants to handing out food. What a little twerp. Now, it's unknown, but historians believe maybe, just maybe, he was a tad mad. Who's to tell? Either way, don't touch the rye bread, Christian. Thanks. Go wash your hands. Twice. Number 2, King Henry VIII. Again. Of course, we have to talk about Henry VIII again. He's pretty bad, not gonna lie. Henry VIII was King of England from 1509 to 1547. He's been married a handful of times, as we've heard by now, and all of them have went south. When Henry married Catherine, he was 49. She was a few years younger. She was actually a lot younger, classic 1500s. way too young. And when they got married, Henry was not the same as he was when they had met. He had received a nasty jousting wound, so now he was gravely overweight. He didn't do anything, he just laid around all day and complained. So Catherine, of course, just wanted some, shred of a life, and being again quite young, too young, she decided to look for love. Well, God forbid you try and have a life in the 1500s, because then the young queen was accused of having an affair and was publicly and horribly taken out in the courtyard. And finally, coming in at number 1, Henry II. The relationship between Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine is pretty memorable. It's memorable in all the wrong ways, of course. When they first met, things were good, dare I say, with both of them. They were both young, and he was going to be king. He was young, king, guy, young man who's going to be king. And Eleanor, she was married, but once she got an annulment, their love was good. Their love was good and young and ready to be young king stuff. After the annulment in 1152, Henry and Eleanor tied the knot officially a couple weeks after. Love moves quickly, apparently. Henry started having affairs, because of course he did. At this point in this list, we're not gasping at affairs, sadly. But come 1173, Eleanor had convinced their sons to go against father. Yeah, Henry didn't take this well, and he had Eleanor locked up for 16 years. He had died, so after that point she had resumed the royal roles, because at this point those two boys had grown up and inherited the throne, Richard and John. But being locked up for that long, what a nightmare that relationship was entirely.
At number 10, royal enemas. Apparently, back in the day, enemas were all the rage amongst the elite. It was believed that enemas were good for your health, so everyone was doing it to try and live a little longer than the rest of those commoners and peasants. One person who really just couldn't get enough enemas in his life was King Louis XIV. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. When I tell you this guy was obsessed, I'm not kidding. One year, Louis received 212 enemas. In just the 1 year. And of course, he had to make his enemas a little jazzy and couldn't just use water like any other person. Oh no. My guy was using things like almond milk. His enemas were also sometimes scented with orange or rose, and sometimes even colored just to make it a little more special. To get an idea of just how obsessed the elite were with receiving enemas, just think about the fact that a French duchess once received one during a court ball. The duchess was in the middle of having a conversation with Louis XIV, and during this conversation, one of her maids came over, snuck under her dress, and gave the duchess an enema on the spot. Ew. These people were so weird. At number 9, pampered pony. I'm sure I can speak for most people when I say when you have a pet, you love and care for that thing like it is your child, right? Well, one Roman emperor might have taken that concept a little bit too far, because saying that he was obsessed with his horse is an understatement. The Roman emperor known as Caligula had a horse named Incitatus. Caligula was a horse racing enthusiast, so Incitatus was his pride and joy, and not too many people were all that thrilled about it, to be honest. When I tell you this horse was treated better than most people have ever been, I'm not kidding. The horse's stall was made out of marble, his manger was made out of ivory, and he was even fed oats flaked with gold. Caligula was also very adamant about his horse receiving a good and restful sleep before a race, and he was so serious about it that he made guards stand outside of the horse's stable to make sure that the horse remained undisturbed while it slept. This horse even had its own furniture. Like, what is he gonna do with it? He's a horse. Caligula was so fond of his horse that he even made it a priest and promised to make him consul, which was the lead position in the Roman government after the emperor, highly coveted by senators. This was the last straw for people because the emperor was putting his horse above his own people, so he was assassinated. Now, before I carry on telling you guys about the wild and crazy things that kings did back in the day, I would like to first ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe think about subscribing as well to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mumia medicine. It's safe to say that medicine from the past is very different from modern times. These days we have pharmaceuticals to treat illnesses, but back in the days of old there were very different and quite questionable methods of treating ailments, and one of those methods included cannibalism. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common practice for elites like priests, kings, and other nobles to consume remedies that included human bones, blood, and fat as medicine to treat ailments from headaches to epilepsy, and this practice was called mumia medicine. At first, it started with people using Egyptian mummies and skulls from Irish graves for use in medicine, as bones would be ground and used in different tinctures for various uses. But soon, other parts of the body started to be used. Human fat was later used to treat ailments on the outside of the body, and blood would be consumed as well, as it was believed to contain the vitality of life. Several monarchs were known to use mummy medicine, like Charles II and William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark.
Number 7. Midlife crisis. This one's kind of generalized because if I didn't, I'd have to mention almost every king ever. So here we go. Back in ye olde times, the access to better healthcare just wasn't there. Doctors aren't washing hands. Imagine, Buddy eats some greasy mutton and then says, "Alright, time for your enema." But those aren't the only greasy hands around certain orifices I'm talking about. I'm talking about kings marrying older girls at the ripe age of 12. Yep, that's right. Nothing says experience in womanhood like being 12. People didn't live long, and oftentimes these arranged marriages had ulterior motives, like alliances or business really. However, that does not make up for marrying a 12-year-old who may or may not have started those super weird changing times, like when you were 12 and now there's hair showing up in places that you didn't know there could be hair. I sent a courier to the chief and he came back with this message: "It ain't it." Number 6. Till death do us part. Love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage, but sometimes the crooning words of Frank Sinatra aren't enough to keep people in love. Sometimes marriages end up like the ones we see on sitcoms, but when there's no laugh track, it's not very funny, and sometimes divorce is the answer. Medieval Germans thought this too, and something they practiced was divorce by combat. Basically, the man goes into a hole with his arm tied behind his back, and the woman is free to move around with a sack of rocks. These proceedings are strange, as I'm sure no husband or wife married today would ever get so frustrated with one another that they would want to hit one another on the head with rocks. Oh, the blessings of being married. Number 5. Domestic disturbance. William the Conqueror was one down bad dude. The illegitimate ruler to the throne left a bad taste in some people's mouths, and was just as ruthless in silencing those rebellions that were always uprising against him as he was with the famous battles he was a part of, like the Battle of Hastings. But what I think he should be remembered by is the way he asked Matilda to marry him, or rather the extreme measures he took when she refused his advances because he was an illegitimate leader. William dragged Matilda by the hair out into the middle of the street and beat her until she agreed to marry him. I don't have to tell you how messed up that is, and I sure hope I don't. Number 4. Nero Sauna. The Romans were kind of a big deal, especially if you're into history. Large city, culture, and some other structures are still around today. That's kind of cool. But while the city of Rome may have been the best city on earth at the time, Romans themselves could use a little work. Meet Emperor Nero, the vicious leader of Rome who became emperor through ill-gotten gains. However, in what may have been one of the first acts of flexing the male patriarchy, the divorce, or forced separation of his wife Claudia Octavia, comes to mind. It was a rocky marriage from the start. There was a general dislike from the very beginning, but when Nero remarried, as emperors did, he had Octavia banished to an island, where shortly after she would be suffocated in a hot vapor bath. Her demise was sad for most Romans. Oh yeah, and they tried to make it look like she did herself in. That's messed up, man. Number 3. Pedestal. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal sometimes. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, really enjoys collecting stamps. You go, little rock star, collect those presidential stamps. However, Emperor Caligula of Rome had some other ideas. He would literally put his wife, who he claimed to love, up on a pedestal stark naked, and let his friends in the military gawk and glare at her. He would also say to her that he could end her life whenever he wanted, and put a knife against her for no reason. Weird flex, but okay. This guy was awful to everyone, as he tormented and unalived so many people. Well, you sure wouldn't want to see his face everywhere, as he liked to do just that. Built statues of himself everywhere because after losing your family to his tyranny and looking at his wife, you need to know who's responsible for all this. That's messed up. Number 2. Duzong Duzong Duzong. That wouldn't really be a great fraternity name, would it? Well, the Emperor of Duzong of China would think differently, as when he was in charge, that's pretty much what the royal court looked like. Enough drinking to keep AA in meetings for 100 years, and enough ladies of the evening to, Well, I don't have a joke for this one, but there were a lot of them, trust me. Having massive parties like that and enjoying the company of other women is not how you respect your wife. To make matters worse, it seemed that too much partying may have been a bad thing. Who would have thought? As what he made up for in a fun weekend, he lacked in governing, as the Mongols were at his front door, or gate rather. Eventually, his empire would burn to the ground. All thanks to alcohol, and many women who laid down for their lives, literally. Number 1, side piece. Look, I enjoy the company of a woman just as much as the next king sits on his throne. But in my opinion, once you find a wife, it's time to settle down, relax, no more crazy parties like Duzong. This is another generalization, but every king did this. Every king in the past has had mistresses, as if that is a totally okay thing to do to your wife and oftentimes the queen of your kingdom. I'm a reasonable guy, so maybe I can see having your side piece waiting in the wings to be stage center, but it's never one, is it? It's always multiple. Ladies of the past, all I can say is make sure you give birth to a boy and watch your back. They're coming for it.
At number 10, some background. The Mughal dynasty in India was founded by Babur, a descendant of the one, the only, Kangaskhan and Tamerlane. After he defeated a sultan of Delhi named Ibrahim Lodi in 1526, Babur was the first step in the Mughal dynasty that would last for over 3 centuries. To say that the empire was immense is an understatement. The empire ruled over 103 million people, probably even more. The Mughals were rooted in Muslim beliefs and were noted for their well-organized government and cultural sophistication. Many of the rulers tried to integrate the Hindus and Muslims under one state, but as we will find out from this list, it was not an easy thing to do, which ended up causing a lot of strife. Many rulers of the empire flip-flopped back and forth between being merciful and tyrannical towards the Hindus, adding to centuries of oppression. At number 9, blinded. Humayun was set to inherit the throne from his father, much to the jealousy of his brothers. He was 23 when he ascended the throne in 1530 after the death of his father. His brothers reigned over different fiefs, but none of them were satisfied unless they had the crown. He also wasn't the best ruler. Humayun was sent into exile for 15 years after he was overthrown by one of his father's generals, Sher Shah. Humayun fled and eventually ended up in Persia, where he built back up an army through his partnership with the Shah. Slowly he took back his land, facing his own brothers who were constantly scheming against him. But Babur, his father, made him promise that he would never lay a hand on his brothers. But his brother Kamran continued to threaten him, and one instance while defending a fort turned on the innocents trapped inside and took their lives viciously. Kamran, not a good dude. Something needed to be done. He eventually catches his scheming brothers, blinds his brother Kamran, and chains his brother Askari. A little messed up, but not bad for war. Before I carry on with the rest of the video, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel and maybe consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. At number 8, Akbar. Humayun continued to deal with the competition of his brothers until finally his reign came to an end, but not in the way that you would expect. He was carrying a bunch of books up some stairs and he accidentally fell, leading to a lethal head injury. His 13-year-old son Akbar had to inherit the throne. Akbar would later become known as the Great, but that doesn't mean that he didn't do some questionable things. Where his father failed to conquer, Akbar swept through. But just like his father, he encountered jealousy and dangerous ambition in the dark corners of his reign. In Delhi, an attempt to assassinate him was made, the bowman nearly missing him. Who was behind it? The slave of a nobleman who recently tried to start a rebellion. But the plot thickens. Akbar's foster brother's mother had further designs to establish power for herself through her son, Adam Khan. Khan actually ended up taking the life of Akbar's foster father, which led to Akbar throwing him down the stairs and therefore killing him. The mother died 40 days later due to grief. Grief over her son or the loss of power. Who knows? At number 7, kissing sheets. For thousands of years, monarchs worried about the threat of being poisoned by their enemies, and so they thought of an array of precautions to take in order to prevent being taken out by some kind of spicy death sauce or something. Many monarchs hired tasters to try their food before it was given to the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned, but some monarchs were also afraid of being poisoned through something that they touched. This is why Henry VIII hired someone with a very important job to make sure that his bed wasn't poisoned. The person who was nobles tasked with making the king's bed was also required to kiss every part of his bed in the morning. They would kiss the pillows, sheets, and blankets to prove that someone hadn't smeared poison on it. The king was also concerned with people poisoning clothing too, so his clothes as well as his son's clothes were also tested for poison before getting dressed. At number 6, eternal youth. I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to live forever. I am one of those people. I am afraid of dying, but I also want to see what humanity will look like many years from now until the sun consumes the earth. Unfortunately, that's kind of impossible, at least for now, until we come up with some kind of way to make people live longer. But this idea of prolonging your life has been around for thousands of years, and one Chinese emperor was super obsessed with the idea and really tried his best to live for at least another 10,000 years. Emperor Ying Zhang was obsessed with finding a magic elixir that would make him live longer, and he demanded that his subjects find this immortality elixir for him. Now, even though he brought a lot of prosperity to people during his rule, he never let go of his demand for immortality, and it put a lot of pressure on his underlings to find him something to help him live forever, but obviously that didn't happen. He was so concerned with his lifespan that he even brought magicians into his court. His obsession alienated him from his people, and after all of that effort trying to live longer, he died at the age of 49. At number 5, no bathing. These days, bathing is kind of a necessary thing. You gotta be clean, you have to smell nice, you have to practice proper hygiene. But back in the olden days, this was the complete opposite, and nobles rarely ever bathed, and it was kind of a trend. Over time, physicians began to believe that bathing was dangerous, and obviously the nobility tried to protect their lives and well-being at all costs, and so they just stopped bathing. In a popular 16th century medical book, it was advised, quote, "Use not baths or stews nor sweat too much, for all openeth pores of a man's body maketh the venomous air to open and for to infect the blood," end quote. So yeah, they thought that taking a bath would make you sick. In the late 15th century, Queen Isabella of Spain would go around bragging about the fact that she had only ever bathed twice in her whole life. Weird flex, but okay. King James IV apparently never bathed, and his hygiene was so bad that he passed on lice to other people who went into a room that was frequented by the king. He also never washed his hands before eating and would just rub his fingers with the wet end of a napkin. These people were gross. At number 4, prankster king. You know that you're a spoiled king when you can pull pranks on people constantly and never have anyone try and stop you or fight back. This was basically the life of King Christian VII of Denmark, who was known for being pretty childish and playing pranks on people his whole life. He was a troublemaker through and through. He was known to play pranks on his grandmother by putting pins in her throne, and he would throw things at her, and he even ran through the streets with his friend and his mistress, destroying shops and patronizing brothels. He even made his own torture rack, had himself tied to it, and flogged. Why? I have an idea, but I don't want to think about that one too hard. One of the other weird things that he was known to do was leapfrog over dignitaries when they would bow to him. This guy was really quite immature. At number 3, saints in bed. I understand the desire to feel protected by whatever gods or saints you might believe in. That's one of the whole points of religion. However, I think some people can take that idea a little bit too far, and by some people I mean the Spanish royal family. These guys took religion very seriously, and they believed that following religion heavily would allow God to heal them when they were sick. So, when a member of the royal family was ill, doctors would remove body parts or even entire corpses of saints from churches and monasteries and would put them in bed with the person who was ill. Yeah, they slept with the corpses of dead saints to be healed of their sickness. Could you imagine if that was still how medicine was practiced today? At number 2, rat court-martial. There has been a record of many kings throughout history who were complete children through and through. Even though many of them grew into adulthood, they still acted immature, and one of the greatest examples of that was Peter III of Russia. He was not a good ruler or a good husband to his wife, who would later become Catherine the Great. Peter spent every night in bed with her playing toy soldiers because he was obsessed with his little dolls. He was so obsessed, in fact, that when a rat chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers, he was so upset that he held a proper military court-martial for the rat. He proclaimed the rat guilty of treason and had it hung in a tiny gallows that he had built for the occasion. It was weird, but in the end that bizarre event helped Catherine overthrow her husband, so I guess it kind of worked out for someone. And finally, at number 1, groom of the stool. Guys, I found the worst job in history. You think working at the 1-star Domino's Pizza in your neighborhood is bad? Wait until you find out about the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a job created during the reign of Henry VIII, where the role was to monitor and assist the king in his bowel movements. They would carry around a commode at all times, and they were also tasked with monitoring the king's diet and meal times, and would organize the king's days around his break times. They were also tasked with undressing the king for him to do his business, and it's also been suggested that they would have had to, quote, cleanse the royal posterior as well. Sounds like a pretty crappy job to me, but I'm not funny, I'll leave.
Number 10. No one's ever really gone. You may have heard that said when losing a family member, a pet, or in the worst Star Wars movies ever made. Sorry, not sorry Disney, those are terrible. But perhaps there is someone who is never really gone. Kangaskhan. Yes, that's right. The ruthless Mongol warrior who conquered so much in his time that we're still talking about it today. So why is this big bad warrior still with us today? Well, that's because of DNA. Yeah, in his time there was lots of activities going on, besides the usual pillaging the village and unaliving those who oppose you. There were a lot of happy endings, let's say, and by that I mean forced non-YouTube friendly conduct bedroom happy endings. So much so that when a study was conducted back in 2003, 8% of men in Asia were thought to be descendants of the mighty man himself. 0.5% worldwide. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about millions of people here. Next time you go out, you may be brushing shoulders with the warrior's kin. Prepare for battle! Number 9. Henry again? Boy, it's really hard not to talk about this guy. But dude was kinda down bad for it. He's just most well known for his mistreatment of his wives, and by mistreatment, I don't mean getting into a fight over whether or not the toilet seat should be up or down and then having a very toxic argument in front of family members. No, because when Henry was upset with marriage, he wanted divorce, which honestly was kind of taboo for the time. Oh yeah, and he also beheaded 2 of his wives because that's how it goes. I know every couple has their issues to work out, but for most dads out there, having sun-drenched beer-fueled weekends, they never go beheading after that. Although, Dad's been staring at the lawnmower for a while and there's a lot of blades on that. Dad? While it is true King Henry VIII did behead 2 wives, he didn't do it to all of them. And at some points we're honestly quite pleased with his holy sanctity of marriage. Anyone who's ever been married can tell you how peaceful and sacred that bond really is. Number 8. The People's Princess. Okay, I know Prince Charles isn't exactly a king, but he is royalty, and the man kinda did Diana dirty. That's a quick and half put together allusion to a Michael Jackson song for the English majors and the audience. Being royalty isn't easy. Being royalty in a modern age when paparazzi overwhelm you with lights and cameras just for a juicy piece of gossip like, when was your last bowel movement? Is it slow? Extra, extra, read all about it, the princess is constipated. That's just not fun. So after Prince Charles and Princess Diana had been married for a few years, you can understand how excited the media was to find out about their marital disputes. There was 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded, was a quote by Princess Diana that gave the media a field day. Sadly, Prince Charles was having an affair, and it wouldn't be too much longer that Diana would perish in a car accident that may or may not be organized by the royal family themselves.
Number 7. Party hard. Zhu Huzhou was the emperor of the Ming Dynasty in the early 1500s. Now, lately we've been talking about kings and queens. We're on part 2s for both now, and there's a good amount who simply just aren't ready. They're too young to rule. Like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Kings like that actually existed. They were horrible. They were young, they were too young to know what was right and wrong. Plus, they usually have some corrupt parents whispering in their ears the entire time. Zhu took the throne at just age 14, and for a while, ministers were confident that he would grow into the role and become the leader that he was born to be. Well, when he got older, he transformed a zoo just outside of Beijing. He transformed it into his own personal brothel. Yum. I mean, on one hand, I'm glad the animals are free, but like, a zoo? You couldn't find a more romantic place? Can convert an Applebee's to a brothel, maybe? I don't know, something with AC? His final days were spent partying, and some would say a little bit too hard. He got intoxicated and fell from a boat. That's how he ended his life. Honestly, not a bad way to go out. Pretty OG.
At number 6, love game. A lot of kings and queens throughout history have been known to engage in the horizontal hustle a lot. I mean, when you're a ruler of a kingdom, you don't really have much to do in your spare time, so what else are you gonna do? Play a board game? No. These monarchs were getting busy all the time, but there was one king who was just so obsessed with getting a good old pickle tickle that it just became his whole personality. King Philip V was known to be a nymphomaniac, and he liked doing the deed a lot, but because at the time, the Catholic Church said that having sexy time with anyone but your spouse was a sin, the king and his wife were getting busy all the time. Eventually, his first wife caught on to how to use this to her advantage, and she would often refuse to sleep with him until she got her way with anything she suggested or demanded from him. You would think that he would catch on to this game, but maybe his urges were just so strong because he always caved and gave her what he wanted. Obviously, this man did not follow Hoodville. Absolutely not. Just to give you guys an idea of how obsessed this guy was, when his wife was on her deathbed, before she went he literally tried to get one last bang in. On her deathbed. Like, dude, not the time.
Number 5, George V. We love hobbies here on Bumblebee. I mean, I used to collect special quarters growing up. I swear to God. The only time I've ever been good at saving money was when I was 12. I would see one of these and be like, don't touch it. George V turned out he loved stamps. A lot. Like a lot. Since he was a wee young lad, he was collecting these little guys. Here's the unusually impressive part about him though and his hobby. He continued to collect stamps during World War I. This guy was busy, everybody's trying to stay alive, and George is just licking stamps in the library like a prince. Like all collections, it started at an early age, and now it's at the point where it's past impressive and it's just borderline strange. This guy had albums on albums of stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. Quick maths, that's like 20,000 pages full of stamps. So naturally he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather the King of Philately, the official term for collecting stamps. It's a nice word. Philately. Back in 1905, he set an all-time stamp record, which I didn't even know that was the thing, and it was the most money ever spent on a single stamp. The guy dropped like 220,000 US on a single stamp. Somebody even asked the prince down the road if he had heard about this idiot who spent 1,400 pounds on a stamp, and he was proud of it. He was like, that was me, you wanna see it? The next King George is a little different, to say the least.
At number 4, womanizer. I'm going to preface this by saying that George IV of England was voted as England's worst king by historians, so that should already tell you a lot about this guy. Georgie here was yet another one of those monarchs who was a little too invested in his intimate conquests, you know? Now we do know that the encounters that he was on were all consensual, so that's a plus. However, he was still creepy about it. Yeah. This man tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw a tantrum if she said no, or threaten to end his life if he didn't get to do the 8-legged nature dance, you know? Somehow, this had a pretty good success rate, even though he was not a catch at all. It feels like this was one of those situations where you kind of just give in to make him stop talking, you know? Anyways, this guy was super creepy because on top of the lengths that he would go to just to get some time in the sack, he also kept trophies of his conquests. He would ask each of the people he slept with for a lock of their hair, and he kept them all. Back then, it was kind of common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair that was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa, end quote. Fun fact, if you want to see this insane collection, it is in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want, I guess.
Number 3, Kleptomania Part 2. On our spoiled queens list, Brie mentioned Queen Mary and how she just couldn't stop stealing, which is hilarious to me, just this old lady stealing your shit. Well, the last king of Egypt also had sticky fingers. He was even better at it too. Check this out. Farouk I was the youngest son of Egypt's first king, Fuad I. Now born in 1920 in Alexandria, and in his early days at school, he couldn't concentrate. The king sent him to England even after to hopefully find a better way of teaching, something that works for him, but still it was to no avail. Once the king passed away in 1936, Farouk then got the throne, but also so much property and so much money. He had hundreds of fancy cars, 75,000 acres of land. This guy had it all. Literally, he had anything he could think of, but still he felt like he needed to take more, to steal. At 17 years old, he would slam 12 eggs for breakfast and then wash it down with 30 bottles of beer. Nutritious and delicious. horrible. On top of the fact that he loved to steal, he was the biggest hoarder. So he had thousands of shirts, randomly. He also had 50 diamond-studded walking sticks for some reason, and like a prince such as myself, he too collected coins. I mean, his collection was much nicer, but still, great minds think alike. Spoiled minds think alike, rather. Oh shit, this is eye-opening. One of the most bizarre facts about Farouk was he pickpocketed Winston Churchill once. He took the guy's watch. After everything I just said, he still decided to steal his watch. What a gem. We love him. Yeah.
At number 2, the King of Pettiness. Let's talk about a ruler that the Indian state of Alwar has described as controversial. If his own people are calling him controversial, then you know something's up, and boy, you better strap in because you're in for a wild ride with this one. Maharaja Jai Singh was pretty eccentric in a pretty dark way. He was known to have a temper and act on impulse, and he did some very questionable and downright scary things. He was known to be very competitive and hated to lose. One time while playing polo, he and his team lost, and so in retaliation he blamed the horse he was using and made the horse get extra crispy. He fired his horse. I'm sure you know where I'm going with that. If not, use your noodle, I don't know. Unfortunately, the cruelty towards living things didn't stop at animals, and he was also known to kidnap women from the streets and go all criminal minds on them. On a slightly lighter note, though, the Maharaja was also known to be very petty. Once he went into a Rolls-Royce dealership, and the person working there thought that he was broke and ignored him. Thinking that this was insanely rude, he bought 7 Rolls-Royces, sent them back to India, and used them to pick up garbage. This guy was really just doing the absolute most.
And coming in at our number 1 spot, King Ludwig II. Home renovation shows rock my world. I can watch, love it, or list it for months at a time. It's the dream, building your own home one day, and if you're a king, well, it's pretty easy to get that done. In our Spoiled Queens Part 2, I mentioned a princess that had a house made of ice, literal ice. Well, King Ludwig II had numerous castles built to resemble fairy tales. Literally, like fairy tales. I gotta admit, I kind of love this a lot. Ludwig was only 18 when he became the King of Bavaria in 1864, and then he had castles, like castles, more than one, built after he was inspired from romantic literature and spending some time at the opera. The kid was a dreamer, you gotta love it. He would spend his nights in one castle looking through a telescope at his new castle being built, so he would just watch it all night. That's like the king's way of waiting for your Amazon delivery. Just standing there, just like, oh, it's coming. 17 years and it's done. Just 4 years in, he designed his own castle, and to this day, it's one of the most photographed places in the world. Neuschwanstein Castle. Go check it out. It's literally a paradise.
Number 10, beatings. Of course, beatings was a very common torment punishment method used in prisons, not just as a means of getting information out of prisoners, but out of sadistic form of control. As I mentioned, when it comes to revolutionaries like Andres Bonifacio, people would be beaten on the streets and then also beaten in prisons, all under the notion that it was supported by the Catholic Church. Even now, in current times, with Palestinian children being released from Israeli prisons, they also noted in details brutal beatings caused by Israel forces. Mohammed Nazal, a 16-year-old teen from Jenin, exposed the maltreatment that he was subjected at the Negev prison. Nazal was beaten brutally several times and was released with a broken hand and a broken finger. He was a subject of medical neglect as they didn't cast his broken hand until he was released to the Red Cross. He then reports of a cellmate being killed by brutal beatings and an elder prisoner being beaten and also forced to sleep on the floor, saying in quote, "Some lost consciousness as a result of beatings in prison. There was a prisoner after losing consciousness due to beatings, and they took him out of the cell, and I think maybe he had died, but we couldn't learn anything about him. Occupation forces attacked us brutally. They beat some prisoners until they lost consciousness, and others cried from the severity of the torment." Number 9, stuck. The pillory consisted of hinged wooden boards forming holes through which the head and or various limbs are inserted. Then the boards were locked together to secure the captives, and pillories were set up to hold people in marketplace, crossroads, and other public spaces. They were often placed on platforms to increase public visibility of the person, often playing card detailing the crime that was placed nearby. Of course, these punishments generally lasted for only a few hours, but by then you would want to contact your therapist for better help, or if you're lucky, a country with free healthcare. Or contact your doctor for a psychovalve, as this is also a typical form that they would use back in the day when it comes to prisons, but still being forced to bend forward and stick your head out in front of them. Offenders of the pillory would also be extremely uncomfortable during their punishment. However, the main purpose in putting criminals in the pillory was to humiliate them publicly. On discovery that the pillory was occupied, people would get excited as they gather in the marketplace to taunt, tease, and laugh at the offender on display. Those who gathered to watch the punishment typically wanted to make the offender's experience as unpleasant as possible, because why wouldn't they? It was their form of entertainment, and if you were poor and didn't have a job, you might as well take the time off your day and throw tomatoes at someone who can't fight back. Number 8, Anasurushi. One of the most violent phases of Japan history against Catholics took place from March 1633 to August 1634, especially in Nagasaki. The government started a systematic search for priests and faithful together for a new kind of torment, the anatsushurishi, or also known as the pit. They dug a pit some feet deep, and above it they erected a frame from which the body would be hung up by the feet to prevent the blood from flowing into the head and causing death too quickly. They then also tied the body tightly with ropes and cords, and these hands were tied behind someone's back, and the prisoner was lowered into the pit down to his belt or navel, even down to his knees and legs. The pit was then also closed by two boards which were cut into such wise that they would surround the body in the middle and let no light enter. They did this to prevent the person from also getting food and had to experience the punishment of life and death.
At number 7, Jahangir. So this guy was super impatient to become the ruler and was getting tired of Daddy Akbar taking his time. So he revolted. Damn, this court honestly was just rife with rebellion. They never got tired of it. In 1599, while his father was otherwise engaged and away from the palace, Prince Salim led a revolt. During the revolt, he even skinned a man alive. Akbar was pissed about this and wrote to his son and said, quote, "I have never skinned a bird alive in my life, and you have treated a human being in this manner." Jahangir then went on to conspire against a close advisor of his father named Abul Fazl, whom Jahangir killed in a small battle. Despite Akbar being devastated at his son's behavior, he was the only male heir left to inherit, so on Akbar's deathbed, he forgave his son and implored the nobles to recognize him as a leader. At number 6, sewed to an ox. Now Jahangir was emperor, but the trouble didn't stop there. I saw some sources recognize him as a somewhat benevolent figure, while others said that he was the exact opposite. He was pretty brutal, and his first task was crushing a rebellion against that which his own son began. Apple, not far from the tree. He was traveling to Lahore when he came across two nobles who were sympathetic to his son's cause, so he decided to punish them in a very peculiar and violent way. He ordered that one be sewed to the skin of an ass and the other to an ox. Now that is messed up. When he got to Lahore to face the rebels, he crushed them and blinded his own son as punishment. A ruler couldn't have any impediments, so therefore his son could no longer pursue the role. Then he hung his son's followers outside of Taksali Gate. Yeah, so even within the confines of war, this guy had some pretty messed up ideas. At number 5, the horse and his boy. On the less violent end of the spectrum, Jahangir was actually a big fan of the arts, science, and worldly things. Unlike his father, who couldn't read and write, an interesting skill for a ruler not to have, Jahangir was all about it. He really wasn't interested in military, which was a task he left to his son. But he did inherit his father's wealth, and considering he wasn't working in the military, he had time to indulge his curiosity. In his memoirs, there are fantastic paintings of exotic animals. There's a painting of a zebra that has a very funny story behind it. The zebra was being taken as a gift to the Safavid Shah, and it was traveling through the port of the empire. Jahangir heard about it and had it brought to court first, and didn't believe that it was real. He thought that it was a painted horse, so he had people try and wash them off. Only when the paint didn't come off did he realize his mistake and ordered that the wondrous creature be painted. At number 4, Shah Jahan and the Taj Mahal. Okay, so this one isn't messed up for violence or anything, but it is the ultimate love story, and we just can't leave it off this list. There is one part that is messed up to me because, man, I don't even know, but we will get to that. If you've ever been to India, then one of the stops you made on your trips was probably to the Taj Mahal, a breathtaking mausoleum built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to commemorate the love of his life. Considering how big and intricate it is, you know that their love was bigger than any storybook. An Indian poet called the Taj Mahal a teardrop on the cheek of time, a testament to grief and power. Mumtaz Mahal was Shah Jahan's favorite wife, forsaking all of his other wives just to be with her. They went everywhere together, even on military missions. This is where, from my perspective, where things get crazy. This woman delivered 14 children for her husband. 14. Sadly, whilst giving birth to the last, she passed away, inspiring her king to build this massive structure. Both Shah Jahan and his love are buried beneath it. At number 3, brothers at odds. Shah Jahan's rule was considered the golden rule of the Mughal Empire, so how do you top that? Aurangzeb did not even bother trying, and he kinda sucked. He was Shah Jahan's third son, and he was a very military-minded man, showing tactical and strategic military skill and unrivaled determination, whereas his brother was a man of letters and no, not the kind from Supernatural. Aurangzeb wanted power, and so in order to secure his rule, he confined his ailing father to his own palace, caused the death of one of his brothers, and had two more of his brothers, a son and a nephew, executed. He was literally committing fratricide left, right, and center. But it didn't matter to him because he gained control. His desire to prematurely end the lives of those who stood in his way was described as, quote, a wolf thirsting for the blood of his brothers, end quote. You would think that this motivation to gain power and rule on his own terms would mean that he had big plans for the empire, which in a way is true, but those plans and changes led to a lot of oppression, but we will get to that in a bit. At number 2, staked. Before we get into the oppression that Aurangzeb caused to his empire, let's talk about Emperor Farrukh Siyar. Farrukh Siyar was emperor of the Mughal Empire from 1713 to 1719. He was described as an incapable ruler who gave his power to all of his advisors. His rule caused many conspiracies and plots to arise within the court. He caused a lot of people a lot of pain for his plight for power. With the help of his allies, he gave many of his enemies the gift of the big sleep, but by far the most ruthless thing he did was kill Jahandar Shah and Zulfikar Khan Nusrat Jung. What made their deaths so brutal was the fact that when they went the emperor hung their heads on poles, and just to add insult to injury, he made their parents walk at their funeral. Luckily for the people of the Mughal Empire, Farrukh Siyar was killed by unknown assailants at the instructions of his close relatives, putting an end to his awful reign. And finally, at number 1, the Great Oppressor. Aurangzeb's rule sort of had two chapters to it. At first, Aurangzeb was a capable ruler of a mixed Muslim-Hindu empire who was feared yet respected for his vigor and skill, but around 1680, Aurangzeb's rule changed drastically in both policy and attitude. His once unified people of both Muslims and Hindus broke apart, and people of Hindu faith became subordinates, not colleagues. On top of that, Aurangzeb added some more oppression to the mix and not only destroyed Hindu temples, but he also reimposed the Jizya tax on non-Muslims, after the tax was initially banned by Emperor Akbar. For the first 20 years of Aurangzeb's rule, he did not impose a tax, but all of a sudden he started demanding these payments, and historians believe that Hindu uprisings are what caused the emperor to act harshly towards the non-Muslim population. This discrimination caused a revolt to unfold that Aurangzeb's third son supported. Aurangzeb spent his last 50 years taking his aggressions out on the Hindus in the empire, and it's for this reason that he is remembered by many as a tyrant. At number 10, the king of hobbies. Everyone has their interests, right? Like, for example, I like video games, and I like watching people scream at their teammates for not helping everyone else out. I'm looking at you, Blake. For kings back in the day, they didn't have people on Rocket League to scream at, so they had to find other interests. For Tsar Peter the Great, he had a lot of interests, and they were all very bizarre. Firstly, he had an obsession with short people, especially dwarves. To him, they were like his real-life dolls or something, and he would hold weddings for them, and even hold lavish funerals, complete with small horses pulling a small coffin on a carriage, and even a very short priest to hold the ceremony. But other than this obsession with short people, he also dabbled a bit in medicine. He liked watching surgeries be performed like he was trying to be on Grey's Anatomy or something, but when watching the surgeries just wasn't enough for him, he would sometimes perform them himself. Now remember, he's not a doctor, so it's no surprise to learn that these surgeries rarely ever went well and people died. I certainly wouldn't trust him to give me any kind of surgery, but he was a king so he could do whatever he wanted. Peter the Great also loved dentistry. It is said that if you wanted to get all buddy-buddy with the king, all you had to do was let him pull your tooth. Sounds like the guy was one heartbreak away from starting his own medical drama, but in the worst way.
Number 9, banning coffee. This is the worst of the worst, people. Morad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The guy banned coffee like an absolute monster. No more triples for you. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because he was so young. That's often the case with most of these young rulers. They just get, hey, you're 7, now you rule a kingdom, enjoy. It's tough, they're not gonna know what's going on. But when he got a little bit older, he put forth these laws, punishable by death, might I add, in order to get things back on track. That was the key. He banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. He would actually disguise himself as a civilian during the nighttime and would wander around aimlessly in hopes that he would find one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you didn't get fined, but rather, Morad IV himself would take your head off right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. All because you're drinking a Bud Light Lime.
At number 8, why you mad? Now this could be a bit of a controversial opinion, but if your name includes the words the mad, I would assume that you're not doing too great, right? I mean, you have to earn that title, and if it's a title that harsh, that simply begs the question, what in the HE double hockey sticks did you do to get that name? Well, for Charles the Mad, he did a lot. Charles became king when he was only 11 years old, so that certainly didn't help his development, and knowing this kind of helps explain a lot of his actions. He was known for getting really angry and throwing fits of rage, and was known to give people the gift of the big sleep, if you know what I mean. Charles didn't always kill people though, only sometimes. Other times he liked to switch things up. Sometimes he would run around his palace pretending to be a wolf. Other times he would go through phases where he just really didn't want to keep up with his personal hygiene, and he would get so gross that he literally had to be cut out of his own clothes. Now I don't know how long you have to go without bathing to get to that point, but really I don't think I want to know the answer to that question. Charles also thought that he was made of glass, and so he would go through phases where he would sit completely still so that he didn't break. Kind of like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, but not as, you know, extraterrestrial. Well, maybe he was. That honestly would explain a lot.
Number 7, marked, in form of corporal punishments from temporary to more permanent, involving the following list, although in some cultures tattooing isn't seen as a bad thing. A part of their heritage may even be a source of pride, but in some cases they would also use it as a means of marking an individual for their shame. As an example, Nathaniel Hawthorne in The Scarlet Letter famously marks its protagonist, Hester Prynne, with the red letter A for adultery after accusations of her behavior circulating. The adulterers were actually forced to be marked on their clothing to identify for their crime. Like Hester Prynne, A or the letters AD are outlined by Plymouth Colony law from 1658, and adulterers are also seen publicly without their letters were subjected to public whipping and even further humiliation and social alienation. The humiliation can be extended intentionally or not by leaving visible marks such as scars, and they can also be main intention of the punishment as a case of scarifications such as human branding. Number 6, flogging. When it comes to another form of public punishment in prisons, as well as a part of the prison system, some might actually be subjected to flogging or being whipped. Typically, flogging has been imposed as an unwilling subject as punishment. However, it can also be submitted to willingly even be done by oneself in a sadomasochistic or religious context. Offenders could also be subjected to beatings with implements such as a whip or a rod, which were meant to cause pain and severe deterrent. In the Dark Ages, the Whipping Act was actually passed in England in 1530. Under this legislation, vagrants would also be taken to nearby populated areas where they would be tied at the end of the cart naked and beaten with a whip throughout the market town, and the body shall be bloody. Although most of the whipping are typically done where the victim is wrapped around the pillar with their back exposed, and there's also another called foot whipping where one's feet would be exposed, and in some countries, even to this day, the punishment of foot whipping is executed in public. Number 5, forced labor, also known as slavery, as we know, consists in enslaving another person as property and ownership into bondage. And in history, my god, there were slaves everywhere, from ancient Greeks who were known for taking prisoners of war as slaves and mistreating them to an aggravated degree, as there were no laws protecting them, as well as in ancient Egypt and ancient Rome. And as we know, when it comes to closer to our modern history, slavery conduct in Latin America was an economic and social institution that existed before the colonial era. Well, it still was colonial era if you think about it. After the conquest of Latin America by the Spanish and Portuguese, of the nearly 12 million slaves that were shipped across the Atlantic, over 4 million enslaved Africans were brought to Latin America. As of today, according to the Walk Free map, an estimated 50 million people were living in a modern slavery on any given day in 2021, an increase of 10 million people since 2016. As well as their index, 2023 placed the US as among the smaller group of nations, which also includes China, North Korea, and Russia over its use of compulsory prison labor. Number 4, sleep deprivation. Unfortunately, another form of punishment used in some prisons includes sleep deprivation. In November 2006, former US Army Brigadier General Janis Karpinski, in charge of Abu Ghraib prison until early 2004, reported seeing a letter apparently signed by the US State Secretary of Defense Ronald Rumsfeld that allowed contractors employed by the US to use techniques such as sleep deprivation during interrogation. Methods used include beating, binding in contorted stress positions, hooding, subjection of deafening noise, sleep disruption, and sleep deprivation would reach to the point of hallucination and deprivation of food, drink, and medical care for wounds, as well as waterboarding. As an example of this being used, the US Army would be noted to be authorized by the Bush administration. A Guantanamo inmate drawing of some of these torments to which he himself was subjected were published in the New York Times. In addition to brutalizing detainees, there were threats to their families, such as threatening harm to their young, threats to physically violate or cut the throats of detainee mothers, and the number of detainees subjected to these methods have never been authoritatively established, nor how many died as a result of the interrogation regime, although this number could be up to as high as 100. Number 3, pepper spray. Another form of punishment used in prisons that are completely unnecessary is pepper spraying. In early as of 2023, this year, an inmate aged 21 died of a heart attack after being pepper sprayed more than 3 times and fitted his head while detained. The documents reveal details of the intervention of Montreal Bordeaux jail that led to the death of a 21-year-old named Nicolas de Andre Spring. Apparently, while in prison, he had a confrontation and a fight broke out with another inmate where he was sent to isolation. And it was reported he was physically resisting the prison guards, and so a spit hood, a restraining device made out of mesh, was used over his head. And then the guard was ordered to spray him with pepper spray while he had the hood on, basically waterboarding the 21-year-old with pepper spray. After collapsing, the officer thought he was faking his condition and kept spraying him with pepper spray. As a result, they realized he wasn't moving anymore, and within minutes, nurses from the local health authority were said to have arrived on the scene and performed CPR and used defibrillation to try and resuscitate him, but by then, he was already dead. And this was in 2023, by the way, this year. Number 2, enemas. This is going to be as graphic as any other form of punishment as it's used in prisons, but forced enemas is also a thing they do in prisons too. Especially when practiced in a prison environment designed by a stark imbalance in power, such treatment can also be registered as a form of physical harm as well as a non-consensual physical harm when practiced without consent or forcibly carried out against the will of the subjected prisoner. Physical invasive measures of this kind are often purposely taken in order to demonstrate dominance and to assert total control over an incarcerated individual. By the application of a forced enema is a situation of incarceration, one of the last remaining spheres of privacy as well as a personal autonomy being stripped away from the prison inmate. Forced enemas evidently have been used, for example, in Guantanamo Bay detention camp by the United States. In certain cases, it was administered, of course, by the Bush administration under the pretense to counter a prison's dehydration. Form of medical justifications were employed whenever enemas were in fact used as a coercive tool. The justifications were completely bull, and the CIA would administer these to prisoners regardless. Under the guise of it being enhanced form of interrogation, it was still an illegal way to torment people, and it's very gross and sadistic. Number 1, mutilation. Forms of mutilation go through all kinds of brutal acts, from slicing to cutting or firing a battery of attacks. Even from chemicals used in war are forms of mutilation. And although there are hundreds, if not thousands, of counts throughout the world of prison systems using form of mutilation on prisoners as a form of torment and punishment, it's still pretty coherent. The pattern of prisoner self-mutilation examined are due to psychological torments endured in prison systems as well. Typically consists of inflicting cuts, usually by a razor blade, to arms, abdomen, or legs, producing profuse bleeding and lasting scars, but rarely resulting in death. As an example, Tennessee death row inmate Henry Hogasse, fellow prisoner John Hall, warned long ago that he was at risk due to severe neglect by prison authorities, having spent 3 decades in solitary confinement with very little human contact or interaction. And Henry, although he was sentenced to death penalty in 1992, was actually left in solitary confinement. As a result, he mutilated himself by cutting off his private parts. After being released from the hospital, Hodges was returned to the infirmary, and there he was kept naked and restrained by his arms and legs on a thin mattress over a concrete slab in a room that was lit 24 hours a day, with no mental stimulation such as radio or television. His attorney said it was filed in a lawsuit. His fellow inmates became extremely concerned for his well-being. As a result, wrote, "After 30 years of sensory deprivation and seclusions, you have deprived that man of his sanity." But unfortunately, the grievances was rejected as inappropriate, with the unit manager writing that Hall was not an official inmate advocate. This was in 2019.